How's everybody doing? Hope you have a fantastic day. It is Monday, June 8th, and I haven't been doing many streams recently. I've been kind of more into the long form content, but tonight I have a special guest, Joe Heschmeyer from Catholic Answers. Basically, it's sort of official breaking into Catholic Inc. It's taken me around a year, but I've finally, declared total Thomist victory over Catholic Inc. So, how are you doing tonight, Joe?
I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you because I kind of wanted this discussion. We could do the million different discussions of like the earth. Somebody funnily commented on the tweet that I did earlier about this, and said, "Oh, are we gonna have Joe on here to talk about why the early church is Catholic for the 10,000th time?" And I didn't want to do that because there are plenty. There are a billion different videos, an entire book of Joe talking about that stuff. I kind of, for this video, I wanted to gear the discussion more so of us talking about, big idea issues around what sort of apologetics is, where it's going, those sort of things, because I don't want this to be, a never ending sort of cycle of us talking about the same three things over and over again. This is something that I like to do with my interviews, like my Bishop Richard. You're sitting in the same chair as Bishop Richard Williamson and Pope Michael. So you should feel honored for that one.
Pope Michael the First? Was this before he died?
So Pope Michael,
anti-pope?
So I interviewed Pope Michael the First, and I interviewed Pope Michael the Second.
Wow.
Yeah, that one was it's a hilarious interview if you go back and watch it, because he's a Filipino man, very, very nice man, and I didn't know much about him, but he kind of shows up to the interview and then drops the nuke like 3 minutes in that he's okay with married priests. And we're sitting there like, what's going on? And then he can't pronounce Pope correctly. He keeps saying poop, which is just like, this was 3-4 years ago. And I was just sitting there like midnight my time so I could interview him, and holding it together was generational lock-in, as we kids say. So yeah, you're sitting in the same chair as those eminent guests.
No, that chair is vacant.
That chair, true. It is vacant because yeah, true. Anyways, when it comes to sort of this question of the future of apologetics, kind of where I want to go with it is we can view the future kind of from the element of the past. So when it comes to your own lifetime of apologetics, obviously it's been longer than, me and most viewers. Where have you sort of seen the most significant shifts in your lifetime when it comes to like the big opponents to Catholicism?
That's a good question. I thought you were going to ask about the Catholic side, but I like the way you framed that. When I was first kind of becoming aware of the Catholic apologetics scene, it was the latter half of the first decade of the 2000s, so like late 2000s. Sounds wrong, but you know what I mean, like 2009 is when I started my first apologetics blog, and I'd been maybe getting into it for about a year or two before that. And I had not really known that it existed at all. So then when I came on the scene, a lot of the opponents were really ill-informed fundamentalist Protestants on one end and evangelicals and the like, but they genuinely didn't know much about what Catholics actually believed. There wasn't a huge space of, online Catholic information. Right now you can have 10,000 interviews about the early church being the Catholic Church. You can find all that stuff really easily. And at the time, people were still saying things that were just really demonstrably untrue and easily disproved. And I don't just mean kind of fringe or crackpots or anything like this. N.T. Wright, the Anglican bishop.
Yeah.
I really like a lot of his stuff, but he has one part in one of his books where he talks about how Catholics don't believe in the Dormition of Mary and Orthodox don't believe in the Assumption of Mary. And it takes about 2 minutes, maybe, of Googling to realize that these are inaccurate statements. And, the Dormition is a matter of pious belief. It's not something the church has dogmatized. But even in the dogmatic declaration of the Assumption of Mary, some of the quotations refer to her falling asleep and then being assumed into heaven. And certainly you can find a bunch of Orthodox churches named things like the Church of the Assumption of Mary. And in the Orthodox Church's calendar for the August 15th Feast of the Dormition, it explicitly talks about her, assumption into heaven. And so I just give that as an example that there were a lot of low information Protestants who were very loud and just genuinely didn't know a lot. They weren't being bad faith. They just, in many cases, didn't know Catholics, didn't know Catholic theology, or if they'd interacted with Catholics, they'd interacted with low information Catholics who didn't have a lot that they knew about their faith. The people who tell you, I went to 12 years of Catholic school, and then you just kind of brace yourself for the thing that's going next. So that was all kind of at the introduction of my exposure to the apologetics world. But around this same time, it also became really clear that New Atheism, I mean, by this point, New Atheism was very much in its ascendancy, or maybe at its peak. There was beginning to be a shift towards focusing on, well, how do we answer atheism in an intellectual way? And one of the great difficulties with it is knowing where you can even find common ground, because obviously you can be like, well, look, the Bible contradicts you, but that's not going to go anywhere. But even if you use something like philosophy and formal reason, a lot of the crowd that was really the loudest in support of New Atheism were people from the hard sciences who had very little attention for or understanding or appreciation of philosophy. If you go back, you can find a really cringy video of Bill Nye talking about how you don't need philosophy. And all of his reasons are, of course, philosophical, but he doesn't understand this. And he doesn't really know what philosophy is. He just thinks it's like, well, maybe we're all in a simulation. Like, that's his idea of philosophy. So there was definitely a move towards answering atheism. And now I think we're kind of in an interesting spot where, honestly, the kind of apologetics that I do is targeting, more than anything else, well-intentioned and fairly well-formed evangelicals and other Protestants who I can have a conversation with using the Bible, and it'll make sense. And you don't have to do the really exhausting work over and over again of, okay, what do you believe in? What kind of sources of authority will you accept? And I do that largely because I have a lot of love for the people in that community, and because it's an easier conversation to have. And then, as you alluded to before, I've been doing a lot more work in terms of responding to Mormonism. I've actually done that periodically throughout my entire time in apologetics. It's starting to become bigger because I think people are starting to see more online. Like, there's much more of a Mormon online apologetics community, and that just absolutely did not exist when I was kind of coming up in this space. So those would be the major changes. And then the other major change is Eastern Orthodoxy. Eastern Orthodoxy was just one of those, like, hey, as a Catholic, you'd be like, Protestants, you don't just disagree with us, you disagree with the Eastern Orthodox as well. And now it's like, oh, look, they can actually speak for themselves. And, it's interesting seeing the areas of agreement and disagreement.
That's interesting. So you would say in the late 2000s, like, Eastern Orthodoxy kind of wasn't a conscientious threat that you would just sit there and think like, oh, I need to exhaustively study the Filioque so I can talk to an Eastern Orthodox apologist online or something like that.
The first people I've seen in my lifetime doing that were Ibarra and Lofton. As far as I can recall. Now, maybe someone was doing that before, but the generation of apologists before me were very much coming from a Protestant world and had grown up in a very Protestant culture and were used to attacks coming from that flank. And Orthodoxy, I want to say, is like doubled in size. I mean, it's still very small, but in terms of its U.S. presence. And the other thing that it's done is, I want to say, okay, so I'm trying to recall these stats completely offhand, and they could be wildly wrong. But in the early 2000s, Orthodoxy was mostly female, just slightly, but like 55-45. And now it's about 2/3 male. So there's been a huge influx of young men into Eastern Orthodoxy in the U.S. And old school Orthodoxy, by which I just mean like 20 years ago or before, was much more like ethnic Orthodox. It was immigrants and the children of immigrants. And it had all of the good and bad that comes with that, in the same way that, ethnic Catholicism has all of the good and bad. We have some culture, but you also have more of a lukewarmness sometimes. And now you have a very fervent, strident, zealous kind of online Orthodoxy that it just genuinely did not exist.
I think it's really interesting because this sort of reminds me of a video that was done by an Orthodox YouTuber. They were going over Catholic apologists. And I find it very funny how they would rate apologists of, my generation versus apologists of like Scott Hahn's generation. because one of the critiques of Scott Hahn was like, oh, this argument he used against Eastern Orthodoxy, like I didn't find it super convincing. Well, it's like, well, no, duh. It's when Scott Hahn was doing apologetics when he was starting, like he was just answering, low church evangelicals. Like that was just his thing. And some, in the Reformed world, but mostly like that world was what he was thinking about day in and day out. And really, Eastern Orthodoxy probably didn't gather much headspace. And I think that for a lot of, especially the younger people getting into all of these discussions, is they can often look down upon the older generations unjustly, simply because we're coming up in different intellectual context and with different polemical opponents. And like, you're not going to fault somebody, in the 1700s for knowing how to use a musket and not knowing how to use, a battle axe. It's just not the type of weapons you're fighting with, not the type of enemy that you're fighting against. So I think it's very relevant. So when it comes to the
well, if I may, I might add something to that. One of the other things that people online can sort of fail to grasp is that in a time where you have limited time and you're trying to make something as rhetorically strong as you can, anticipating every possible objection is often not actually the best way to do that. And so it always leaves you open to, so every time I do a debate, every time I think anybody does a debate, you will find people in the comments who say, oh, you lost because you didn't answer this argument that wasn't made in the debate. And, it's like, well, yeah, of course I didn't. I have a limited amount of time and I'm answering the arguments that are actually being made. And similarly, like even when you make an episode, you could spend half an hour each time saying, okay, well, maybe someone is an atheist watching and maybe they think we're in a simulation and I have to explain why everything else that I'm arguing logically follows, premised off we live in reality. I mean, I'm going to an obvious extreme there, but I think it's fine to say the vast majority of people who call themselves Protestant or whatever, they believe this thing, and this is the audience I'm trying to reach. And so maybe you have a different kind of Protestantism, or maybe you have a different understanding of fill in the blank, and that doesn't apply to you. That's okay. That's not a straw man. Like reaching the vast majority of people and not you specifically. If you think that's a straw man, like that is a sign of solipsism or just misunderstanding what a straw man is. By the way, I would be remiss if I didn't say this is live. There have been several questions there. They're shocked you were relatively on time, I think.
Oh, no. I think that I've heard that my fish tank looks cleaner than normal. If you guys can actually notice, there are some fish in there. That's a new development since the last time I streamed. So if you can guess the species of that fish, you're never going to guess. If you can guess the species of that fish, I will Cash App you $1,000. I will send you my bookshelf. There's no way anybody's guessing the species of that fish. But anyways, yes, very, very salient point. I feel like that's something for myself. I had when I was Protestant, I converted 5 years ago. When I was Protestant, I kind of had this sort of frustration at a lot of the Catholic apologetics that was happening, not really specifically dealing with a lot of the objections that I had or the ways in which I would formulate positions. And that kind of led me to, think of what was being said as a straw man. But as time kind of goes on, and I guess I've produced a lot of content and seen a lot of reactions to my content, I've kind of come to understand that what you're saying is completely correct. And if somebody is to make content with and do apologetics, whether it's to individuals or to groups, like this is very relevant to, you guys out there when you're speaking to your Baptist grandma. When you're talking to your Baptist grandma about justification, you're not going to want to tell her, well, actually, there's this view of justification that's different than what you believe. And it was believed like 400 years ago and nobody believes it anymore. But in order for me not to straw man your position, I need to actually bring this up. That's not too incredibly relevant to her, nor to most of the people that you're actually talking to. But those people out there who believe those things, I think it's still true that those people need to be converted. Yeah. And I think there is actually a lot of theological and scientific in the in the Thomistic sense. There's a lot of theological and scientific strength to actually bringing up those sorts of positions, kind of resurrecting them from the dead and treating them, because it leads to, in my mind, like an even more solid case. It leads to a case that is even more. It actually, in my opinion as well, it has led me to insights about things I never even thought about when I'm thinking through these sort of older positions and their arguments against Catholicism. I actually come to understand Catholicism even better when I'm thinking through those problems. So it's both and approach. And I don't
Yeah,
think
I
you
completely
nor anybody
agree. And
else.
I like that you do a much more in depth. You do apologetics for people who want to go deep on things even beyond the level of sometimes what people want to go deep on. There are things where I have to leave out where I just think like, okay, this would be a fun sort of aside. This is kind of an interesting thing to learn about for myself, and I'd love to share it, but 5% of my audience is going to care about this. And I think you are, maybe 20% of your audience cares about it. And that's great. I think Kevin's in the same spot, that you guys can go deep and say, also, these are inaccurate Catholic characterizations. I'm regularly telling people, like, don't just say Protestants have smoke machines and rock bands. But at the same time, I mean, for Protestants who their experience of the faith is smoke machines and rock bands, it's valid to call out, like, yeah, that's not the kind of worship that pleases God, and God cares a lot about how he's worshipped.
Yeah. And I think this actually, kind of last point before I move on to the next thing, I think this is actually somewhat the way in which even sacred scripture speaks when it comes to teaching people. Is when you look at the history of divine revelation, there is an appropriation that comes with the way in which God speaks to men. And it's very important to realize that if God can, reveal the fact that, I've repented or I am angry, it is actually totally legitimate to state things in ways that is going to get across the point without the level of precision that might be required for a different audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, think about how, St. Paul, when he's speaking to the Athenians, he's quoting Roman sources only. Like, he doesn't actually quote scripture at all. He makes an argument using their sources and showing a real level of awareness where he's quoting Roman poetry and such. But most of the time, like when Jesus is giving the Sermon on the Mount or when St. Paul is speaking to a Jewish audience, he's quoting from the Jewish scriptures. And so some of that is just motives of what people are likely to trust as an authority, but also kind of what is the level? You don't have to introduce people to Euripides and say, actually, the Greeks were onto something. Let me explain, the way God is omnipresent, and then we can work from there. Like, you don't have to do that. And so if somebody is having like an existential crisis, you don't necessarily need to start with like the De Auxiliis controversy. You can skip that and do the part about how God loves you.
Yeah, maybe we'll
Unless
put
they're
a
reprobate.
we'll put a pin in there. Maybe we need to introduce the De Auxiliis controversy to everybody. So kind of with that in mind of where things have gone, where do you think things are going in the future? Like, what do you expect to be, things that people would never have expected to actually debate? Like, where do you think what are those areas that we're going to be, having to deal with?
Yeah, this has been okay. So one of the other things that's happened is I've gotten older, and every generation is different than the one before it. And so there's just a different movement within the church where the kind of things we were fighting within the church are very different. Now, maybe you want to save that for the second part, and I can put a pin in that and come back to it. But I think certainly, as I said, there's much more of an interest in traditional Protestantism, high church Anglicanism, even more traditional evangelical Anglicanism, the, more traditional forms of the mainline Protestantism, the kind of thing that Regime Zoomer is kind of pointing towards. Though they're not doing great in terms of numbers, but there's certainly a lot of online interest in that. And people want to know, like, okay, I see why the super low church non-denominational thing is obviously not what the Bible intends. But what about, now I'm discovering these Anglican divines, or now I'm discovering, Philip Melanchthon or fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And how do I answer it? So I think there is going to be more of a need to answer that. We already saw that, 15 years ago, with like the young, restless, and reformed crowd, there was a big
Yeah.
kind of tendency towards, young guys becoming reformed. And there's a similar sort of tendency maybe towards Eastern Orthodoxy and even Catholicism, where you do have to say, like, okay, how much of this is going to last and how much is ephemeral? And we're going to have a lot of work to do in terms of helping it to last, because it can't just be this is cool and countercultural and then people sort of get bored of it and move on. Because that is a lot of the Reformed story, that it looked like there was going to be this enormous uptick in Reformed Christianity. And I don't know the numbers specifically, but it doesn't feel like that's panned out in the last, say, 10 years. So I
Yeah,
think,
there definitely was a collapse among the
yeah.
young
I
restless
mean, partly it
reformed.
was a bunch of scandals with a lot of the biggest names there. So I imagine that we're going to have more niche objections and more niche answers. Where if before the effectiveness and the critique of Catholic apologetics was that it was a little bit one size fits all, it was like, okay, we're assuming you're a kind of normie Protestant American and you are wondering about Catholicism and you don't know any good Catholics. Let's fill you in on all the basic stuff you need to know and why we do things a little bit differently around here. Now it's like, okay, you probably know wildly different Catholics, and now you're wondering why you shouldn't be like Antiochian, or like why should you not become like a neo Mennonite? I don't even, like, something we don't even know about yet.
Yeah.
And so I do think that there's going to become more targeted channels like that. So the analogy would be something like, in the old days you had ABC and CBS and NBC, and
Yeah.
that was the big three. So you had, Broadcast Inc., if you want to call it that. And then you move into, like, you got a gazillion different things and they're bespoke channels. And there's still a place for the ABCs, the NBCs, the CBSs, but there's also a place for the stuff that's really niche. Miles with Answering Adventism, I know he's been critical of the Catholic Church, but his channel is a kind of cool, like his original channel is a cool concept of just, here's a channel of a guy who used to be a Seventh-day Adventist and wants to just go super in depth, where the entire thing the channel does is highlights false things that the Adventists believe, and then making space to like criticize those things. Where even if you decided you wanted to do an episode on Adventism, there's just no way you could go into this level of depth without just losing 99% of the people who'd watch that. And so it's nice that we have that. It's obviously not going to be everything, but it doesn't have to be. So I think the ease with which someone can get a webcam and a YouTube account and start a channel and answer really niche topics is going to really democratize the future of Catholic apologetics in some ways that'll be good and bad. Good in the sense that you can get more answers, bad in the sense that there's less quality control.
Yeah.
And so I think that's going to be the double-edged sword.
Yeah, super. Yeah, that's interesting. Super granular channels that kind of niche deep dive on, singular errors and spend all of their time doing that. Yeah, I actually tend to agree. And I think we already see a lot of this coming to be. But on the other hand, I think there also will always be personality cults. I think that will always forget. Not, it may sound really bad. There'll always be personality cults, but what I mean by that is there will always be people who adhere to a position on the basis of a person's authority. Like like whatever you talk about, Joe, they're going to be like, oh, I guess he's right on that. And they'll kind of watch you. So if you're talking about Mormonism, they'll be like, oh, nice. If you talk about Protestantism, they'll be like, oh, nice. Eastern Orthodoxy and whatever else. I could totally foresee the future being people interested in like granular deep dives, kind of like a lot of history channels, actually. What a lot of history YouTube channels have done is they will do like 10-hour video on like the Battle of Berlin or something. And then the next week they'll do like a 9-hour video on like the Belgian Congo. And it's like these things actually, yeah, sure, they're history. They're not really connected. But just because of the scripting, the editing, and the sort of personality of the person who's actually doing the content, in my mind, it's not going to be so much of like an intellectual flourishing. It's kind of going to be more quality. Actually, I think there'll probably be more production quality control in how things are presented in the future.
I think you'll see both extremes. So I think you'll see both extremes on all of these things. So for example, in terms of length and breadth, you're going to have eyes on screen content where you're going to have Catholic TikTokers. You're going to have Catholics who are saying,
Yeah.
what is the shortest way I can try to present the gospel that doesn't completely humiliate Christianity? Where it's like, can I do it in 6 seconds in response to a TikTok trend? And then you're going to have people who are like, here's the 19-hour history of the Cluniac reforms. And people will be like, yeah, I got to clean the house today. Let's listen to this while I do some cleaning. And you'll find audiences for both of those. The other thing that I didn't predict in the past is that this is really helped and hurt by how incredibly efficient the algorithm is, particularly on YouTube.
Yeah.
Where anytime I try to do something off brand for me, it totally is a dud. And if I just started as a different kind of channel, it would be fine. But YouTube doesn't know what to do with it. Like, it knows who to serve my stuff when it's kind of on brand, and it does great. And then if I'm like, let's talk about spirituality and here's the deeper meaning of this parable or something, it's like, okay, this got a third of the usual views. And it's like, all right, I get it. I know what kind of channel it wants me to be, and I know what kind of channel viewers want me to be. So that's going to be something people have to deal with, because that can be really dangerous.
Yeah.
And so in the space, I might flag 3 kinds of characters. You have content creators, people who are trying to add something new. You've got reactors who, they're taking what other people have done and then responding to it. That's way easier to do from a production standpoint, because someone else has already done the research, and you can just say, like, actually, here's the 3 things they got wrong. And then you have, I don't know a politer term, like parasitical kind of actors, where they're just trying to stir up content stir up controversy to create content, and pitting people against each other, where it's not just like good faith reactions. You're going to have some bad apples in the community, like you do with any community.
Like the TMZ of the.
Yeah, you're right. Like, here's
world.
this scandal. Oh, what did the Pope say about this? Or can you believe, this person online said it this way? You absolutely find that kind of thing. And I think that's just like my own advice to people watching. Watch people creating content. It's also fine to watch people who are summarizing and reacting to content. Like, if somebody watches, for example, you do this sometimes with Pope Leo stuff. You will read things that he's said, and presumably you watch some of it too, and then you just do like summaries in a live stream format for people who maybe they're not going to go through all of the talks and all of there's a summarizing function that can be really good. A commentator, like, that's not a new thing in the church. That can be good as long as they are kind of adding something, even if what they're adding is brevity and synthesis.
Yeah.
But then watch out for that third group where they're not making you a better Catholic. They're not helping you grow in holiness. They're just seemingly playing upon baser passions and getting you really shocked or scared or excited in ways that are not the thing God has called you to.
Very true. Very true. So where do you think in the sort of contemporary landscape, because there are certain areas where there is just a glut of discussion on this or that topic. Like, if you want to go and find a video on Sola Scriptura, you can find 500 different videos on Sola Scriptura.
And none of them are the real Sola Scriptura.
True. We have combined probably to make 50 of those 500. So when it comes to, that, filioque, something like that, like there's a million different things on the filioque. I said my spiel. I might do like a long synthesis video or something like that, but I kind of moved on from talking about stuff like that. Where do you think that there is an area where, beside being a sort of complete, I don't even know how to put this properly on a live stream, but like a complete, a mass of content, where do you think that there's actually just a drought, and that people, they need to actually move into these sections? If somebody was going to go in and actually, do something new, do something fresh, do something, helpful, what are the sort of issues that they're talking about? What are the sort of errors that they're refuting?
That's a great question. Partly, I think if I had a better grasp of that, I would be in those areas more. And that's not entirely the case, but at least partially. We're starting to see more responses to Islam. That for a long time was an area we were weak. And I think we're still weak in terms of Eastern religions. If somebody is Hindu, wondering if they should be Catholic, I don't actually know who to send them to. I don't know a single apologist who handles those. And Hinduism, you want to talk about a complicated sort of what do Hindus believe? It's way more complicated than Protestantism. And so being able to handle those issues in a way that will even come off as accurate to someone coming from a Hindu background is tricky. So I think that's an area where we are just right now dead in the water. Not that there's some great Hindu rebuttal to Christianity, but more that people who maybe they've immigrated to the US or the internet has, introduced them to a whole different way of looking at things, or they grew up here and, their family was Hindu, but they're surrounded by Christians, but maybe they're not the best Christians. They're wanting to know, should I become Christian? What kind of Christian? You can give the general sort of positive case, but being able to answer whatever issues they might have. So to give just one example there, why are the saints okay, but all of these gods are not? What is the difference in the conception of Brahma compared to the classical theist understanding of God? Those kind of questions get super niche and into the weeds, and we could use people doing a lot of that. Additionally, we need more people talking about the goodness of the resurrection. I mean, this is so basic, but if I have somebody who is a Protestant wondering if they should be Catholic, I can give them a trillion, I think that's an accurate number, trillion Catholic books. But if I've got an atheist or an agnostic or someone who's, just sort of vaguely spiritual, wondering if they should become Christian at all, I know a lot of Protestant authors who are doing a lot of, or have done a lot of work in that area. I can think of a lot of older Catholic authors who've done a lot of work in that area, but I don't know a ton of living Catholic channels or anything like this that just start with, I'm going to assume you know nothing and move from there.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about the changing landscape, this is another huge one. I've told this story before, and this story is like 11 years old now, I think. But I was on a college campus and was talking to, so I was doing some evangelization work and ended up starting a conversation with a young woman who told me that both of her grandfathers had been Protestant pastors. And so I kind of assumed she had a certain level of background information about Christianity. She wasn't anything. But as she started talking about what Catholics believe, like she just had a bunch of questions about what Catholics believe, there was no hostility, just genuine curiosity. So she hadn't even gotten some kind of like Catholics are bad because kind of story. As we're talking, at one point I say something about the Holy Spirit and she stops me. She says, wait, you guys think the Holy Spirit is divine too? And I remember, like, I hopefully didn't react in a very obvious way, but I was so flummoxed because I was like, how in the world did you not know that? Like, how in the world was the transmission of faith so profoundly disrupted from your grandparents to you that you didn't even understand that the Trinity was a thing Christians believed in? It was shocking. And so it was a real eye-opening moment for me where we can answer all of these sophisticated, nerdy Protestants, and the vast majority of people who need to hear this stuff are still not going to hear it unless we do some stuff that we get looked down on for doing because it's too pop or too basic or too whatever. But it might be the difference between those people going to heaven or hell.
Yeah, I think in a similar vein, something that I've begun to appreciate is that we just sort of need more general apologetics content rather than simple polemics content. Like if I was to go to somebody and they were to say, okay, well, we've had, let's say, assuming the discussion where I believe that God exists. Now I'm trying to like think about how do I get from that to like Catholic? Like what is the sort of discussion? What are the things I'm supposed to point to? How do I actually look at, the things like the motives of credibility? How do I explain that to normal people? How do I explain what revelation is and how that differs from, what they know about God from nature? I think that whole like movement of just kind of like old form apologetic preaching, which is apologetic preaching was literally not you sit there and refute every single error of your opponents, but you just say like, okay, well, God has said this, God has done this, and this proves that God is saying this and not saying these other things because he has done this, this, and this. That's just kind of, most of the sermons of the book of Acts is miracles and prophecies are being appealed to verify, Jesus Christ as, divine messenger. And I think a lot of that kind of gets lost in the polemical battles. And I think that the polemical battles, it can often cause the apologist himself to kind of lose the point of what he is even doing with the other person. Is when I'm talking to another person, like what my purpose in that discussion isn't necessarily to refute his error. Like that's not an end in itself. Like you can refute somebody's error and they're like, oh, wow, Islam's false, or, oh, wow, Protestantism is false. And then they just go to hell because they're an atheist or they're whatever, you can disprove literally every person on earth and clear them of all of their errors, positive errors, that is, and they'd all go to hell.
Right. Polemics in the strict sense.
Yeah, exactly. So really what there needs to be that second step as well is like, okay, I have, refuted your error. Now you see why you are wrong. Now let's actually talk about, how we can look at something which is right. Like how do we even, if there is something out there which is, truly revealed by God and God has confirmed this as his truth, like what is that going to look like? How are we going to discover that? And that's why I think, the rise of Ethan Muse has been so fascinating for me, because there was a time near the beginning of my channel, you could probably still find those videos up if anybody's interested in that, where I did talk about, the De Revelatione stuff from Father Gary Goulegrand. I talked about the fundamental theology stuff. And I haven't really talked about that much in the last few years, but to see him kind of go out there and actually put it in a way that people are just super interested in and people are very fascinated by, something that I couldn't do when I was presenting that stuff. It's very impressive. And I'm very glad that is now, this is now a sort of fundamental part of the conversation going forward. And I'm very, despite what anybody says about Cameron Bertuzzi, if that's all that he had did in the apologetic sphere, I think that, he would definitely be well worth commendation for that.
I don't know what beef there is with Cameron, but I will say, I think.
Oh, I don't have any beef with Cameron.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess last time I saw you, we were both on his channel, so that's probably a good clue that you don't. But yeah, I mean, Cameron's own journey, and that's not going to be everybody's journey. But I think actually, one of the things I didn't mention, so two things actually, three things. One, 100% agree, and I was thinking about Ethan as we were having this conversation, so I'm glad you said something about him. Two, I forgot to mention Ed Fazer earlier. Good Catholics responding to atheism, presenting a case for Christianity. He's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but he is a smart guy who often is able to present things in a way people can kind of grasp and understand, particularly if they have a little bit more of an intellectual bent. Third, when we're talking about the future of the apologetic scene, I didn't even mention this, but a lot of it I think is just going to be witness and conversation. And this is not my normal media consumption diet. And so I can kind of forget this world exists or that it's as effective as it is. But there's like an entire world of largely Catholic women who just sort of live out Catholicism, share kind of personal life stories and make things that aren't even arguments as such, but are sort of an invitation into a life just by kind of inviting you along. I don't know, how familiar are you with like Rodney Stark's work on the rise of Christianity?
I'm not.
Okay. His background was in the Moonies and in the Mormons, and just as a sociologist tracing how they grew. And then he started to apply this kind of methodology to try to understand how Christianity grew. And one of the things that he found was that religious movements, so leave aside divine grace and the truth and all of this. So we're just looking at a neutrally sociological, how do these things kind of work at the level of just human society? And so this is going to be an incomplete picture, but it's still going to tell us something. One of the things that is the case is that the more you are kind of embedded in a subculture, the more likely you are to convert, which is not tremendously shocking. But one of the points Stark makes is that you have St. Paul and you have Justin Martyr, where St. Paul is an evangelist, Justin Martyr is an apologist. But with those two guys kind of to one side, a lot of the saints in the early church are people who were embedded in a local area and built up a good community there, where you don't see a ton of people traveling around. Now, later on, like when you get into like the 500s, you see much more of people being sent to some pagan area to go and convert them.
Yeah.
But a lot of people early on are just converting the place that they are. And they're doing this partially just by building Christian communities that then take in other people. And so if you find yourself surrounded by a bunch of really fervent Christians, then you're more likely to give Christianity a chance. And we can sometimes forget about that. Father Giertek was one of my professors at the Angelicum, and he would always stress that the act of faith is not merely a movement of the intellect, but also of the will. So anything that turns the will is either good or bad, depending on which direction it's turning it. This is why, if you're trying to do apologetics, but you are, addicted to pornography or something, or you're trying to figure out the true faith, but you are living a life of mortal sin, these are obstructions, like the noetic consequences. But the flip side to that is, if you're surrounding yourself with saintly people, that can help to turn the will in the right direction, even while your intellect is confused. And so I see these online, like lived Catholic spaces as just people being normal and inviting and welcoming people into like online spaces. But also a lot of this is happening offline, where, a lot of people are very alone right now. A lot of people are very isolated, and being invited over to just be like, yeah, let's go get coffee. You don't even have to convince them of every argument that they have. As you were saying before, maybe they have a checklist of reasons why they think Christianity is false. If they see enough good Christians and the life they're living makes more sense than the life they, as a searching atheist, whatever, is living, the likelihood that they're then open to the grace of faith just goes way through the roof, even if there are issues that remain intellectually unresolved. So it's a mistake to imagine that we can or should intend to answer every possible objection before the person will kind of make the act of faith. I know that's a super long answer, but
No, that that makes perfect sense. This is why I think what a lot of the future of apologetics is going to be, like if you kind of wanted to, take the principle of Catholic action and you wanted to go out there and say, okay, how do we actually go and think small, think about your diocese. Like if I wanted to start an organization, I knew people, Catholics, who were willing to, help fund this organization, people who are willing to help volunteer for this organization. If I wanted to, at the diocesan level, sort of basically start a ministry to, let's say evangelicals, like how exactly would that work? You're not going to be going, you're not going to be doing targeted Facebook ads, or you're not going to be going to the street corners and preaching. A good idea might be like a public dialogue with, local pastors, but like, what are you actually going to be doing day to day if you wanted to, like in the next 10 years, bring thousands of people, into the church in your community? Like, how would that actually look like?
yeah,
In my mind, the way that actually looks like is sort of post catechetical formation. Is you're going to have people who are, they're willing, they have a fervent resolve to become holy, to become saints, and you're actually giving these people the confidence to have these sort of conversations and to be able to inform, Protestant coworkers or family members or whatever else it may be about the faith. That's where a lot of the difficulty comes in. Is there are a massive number of laymen who would really love to see everybody in their life become Catholic, but they just don't have a degree of confidence to have those discussions with people. But they're totally, the will is there for sure.
yeah. So maybe it helps to distinguish between teachers and witnesses, to kind of draw on St. Paul VI's point. So not everyone is called to be a teacher, in the sense that, James 3 is really clear. I'll just quote it. Let not many of you become teachers, my brethren, for you know that we who teach shall be judged with greater strictness. For we all make many mistakes, and if anyone makes no mistakes in what he says, he's a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body also. Now, we should think about that in two ways. One, just intellectual errors, that you have a channel and you do your best to present the teaching of the Catholic Church, and you are likely to make some mistakes. And the more you are identified with the Catholic Church, the more damage is done from your own fallibility and errors. But also, your own personal sin is that much worse. And so in terms of the judgment, you do take on a stricter judgment. And that's something people should take very seriously before they decide to go to Twitter and be like the online Catholic guy, or start a channel or anything like this. You have to be very cautious that you're not just shooting the breeze with some friends of yours. You are making a public declaration about Catholicism.
Yeah.
And the more you are a jerk, we'll say, the more that reflects on Jesus Christ and his church, not just on you. And that's when like the gravity of the sin becomes that much greater. But so not everyone is called to that, but everyone is called, as St. Peter says in 1 Peter 3, to always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who calls you to account for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and reverence, and keep your conscience clear, so that when you are abused, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. And so notice the two things there. First, the thing that you're defending is this, like, why I'm Catholic. And this is something that, you were talking about auctoritas, like the credibility of individual people and all of this. You have that in your own group among people who know and respect you.
Yeah.
Like, even if you don't have that on a channel, even if if you are an upstanding Christian gentleman or gentlewoman, and you are striving to be a saint, and the people around you know you're striving to be a saint, and maybe they've even seen a change in you from what you were like before to what you're like now. Sure, you may be a sinner, you may have all these things that they're still aware of all of your faults. But if they see like this is a person whose life has been radically transformed by Jesus, that's the preamble. Like, you have a hope that is in you that makes people want to ask questions. That you are now a subject matter expert on you. You can say, here's why I believe this stuff. And the cool thing about it is there's no research burden there. You don't have to say, here's every possible objection. You just give your own witness of this. And that, just at the level of rhetoric and reason, is actually way more convincing. Like, when I'm reading a review of a restaurant, I want to hear from people who've been to the restaurant and said, this is a great restaurant. I don't want to read someone just tell me, oh, well, the cooking method is this, so on paper, this is probably really good. I've never had it, but I bet it's really good because they use sous vide or whatever. That means nothing to me. Similarly, I buy kids' toys for my children from Amazon. And I want to just create some kind of Amazon policy that grandmas are not allowed to leave product reviews, because grandma product reviews for kids' toys are like, I gave this to my 4-year-old and he was really excited. And I'm like, yeah, but did it break 30 minutes later? Because his parents aren't going to tell you that. You want to know, how does this actually work in real life? So I want to hear like why you're Christian and how that works in your real life. And then everything else is just about how you do it. It's doing it with gentleness, with reverence, keeping your conscience clear, and allowing yourself to be reviled for Christ. That's the kind of thing, from an apologetic standpoint, like that's the actual root of where apologetics comes from. So you're right. Like, I don't think we're going to get an institutional top-down diocesan sort of answer to Protestantism, to Islam, to atheism even, because it's just not how the institutional church tends to run or be set up. But I think individuals can be tremendously effective online and offline by living this stuff in a credible way.
That is so true. That was a very good monologue. Thank you.
Sorry, I know I'm going for it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, this is good stuff. It reminds me a lot. If anybody's interested, St. Peter Faber, he has a good letter. I posted a translation into English on my old website, christianbwagner.com. I should repost it on my Thomism shameless plug, the Thomism.com Substack that everyone should subscribe to, because those are the videos where I'm able to, those are the articles where I'm able to actually do what I want. I hate actually speaking in front of a camera. I like writing better. So there's St. Peter Faber. He gives some advice for, St. Peter Faber, master of St. Ignatius's exercises. So he's the director of souls, probably made hundreds of saints in his lifetime through his spiritual direction. But he gives some very solid advice on how to talk with specifically Protestant converts, and especially those moral issues that they may be struggling with. And I think this is actually even more of a, as civic virtue recedes and the Protestant understands himself as more and more detached from the moral law, I think that there are pros and cons to these sorts of conversations about moral issues, because for a lot of very well-meaning people who recognize, the concupiscence of the flesh is warring against the spirit, and they're able to say with Paul, the wretched man that I am, he's not able to keep the law of God in any way and feels completely devoid of grace. For these people, actually talking them through, asking the questions that may not feel comfortable about their own moral failings, and giving them an authentic way in Jesus Christ to actually overcome these things. It's for a lot of people, that's a very hope-filled message for them through the sacraments that the church gives, her moral teaching, etc., and through examples as well that actually prove that this is possible, the examples of many saints that we have. But then, like, on the other hand, there's a lot of people who kind of recede into a sort of moral debauchery and view the Catholic claim to actually be the receptacle of grace that Jesus Christ has established to be very hypocritical and inefficacious. And that's where what a lot of Joe says comes in very importantly, because you can actually show people that a lot of these things are possible, through grace. You're actually through the sacraments that are instruments of grace, through the teaching of the church that directs grace and directs your passions and will and intellect in a way to actually reach higher degrees of perfection in the spiritual life. And I think that's like a lost sort of witness to people. Is a lot of people, they find those sort of conversations, especially in the current context, to be very grating against people. But I actually think that, especially young men, I think there's a lot of young men who just they despair very heavily about their own ability to imitate Jesus Christ and to obey his commandments. And I think it's actually a very good message that comes from the Catholic Church about this, about both forgiveness and the objectivity of forgiveness, but also about the efficacy of grace that comes through the church. So excellent point, Joe. Thank you for that.
I'm glad you highlighted the Faber article as well, because knowing whether to start with the intellect or the will is something that most of us don't even think to have that conversation or kind of build from that. There's a kind of a 3-step process I've seen in many cases among people coming from, again, this kind of low church Protestant background, where they don't know any Bible believing faithful Catholics. And then to just be a faithful Christian as a Catholic can be shocking and eye-opening. And usually the next step is like, well, there's that one guy. Like, Christian's good, but otherwise Catholics don't read the Bible, or they don't, and so they just will kind of mark out like you're the good one. And as the number of good ones increases, there is some point at which the perception changes. As there's more and more exceptions to the prejudice and the rule, then suddenly that they have to be sort of open to it. And I was talking to a Protestant recently that is just on a very rapid journey into the church, and described the process to me that basically as soon as he realized that his prejudices against the church were prejudices, he didn't have anything left. Like, once those things were out of the way, then he could see all of this. But that's a lot of the work that we're doing, is living a kind of witness where obviously there has to be an integrity between the way you are speaking and the way you are living. Because if your actions don't match your words, then it's hard to move the will, because, like I can give you the greatest diet plan in the world, and it's not going to work as good as Tom Brady giving you the same diet instructions.
Mm. Yeah, I want to. Man, we're almost at an hour yet, and I wanted to get into the questions. We're gonna do Q&A in a few minutes.
I'm yours as long as you want. My wife is gonna put the kids to bed, so I am at your disposal.
True. So, but unfortunately, my my charger is.
Oh,
I have like about 20% battery. Max are good. I'll probably last for another hour here.
okay.
Um, so the direction that I kind of want to take this is into like the dangerous trends direction, because it almost feels like a completely lost world reading some of the orthodox commentators of the 70s, 80s, and 90s when they're talking about like the dangers in the church. Because they're speaking about this, there's this enclave of like liberal theologians who are kind of yapping. And, that's sort of like their, when it comes to the entire context behind something like public dissent, is actually liberal theologians publicly dissenting against the magisterium, and the magisterium becomes the conservative bulwark against the liberal theologian. What I find to be very interesting is it's almost like that sort of rhetoric that was placed against the liberals in the Benedict era and before, that rhetoric now gets placed against the trads. Is like, rather than us speaking about liberal theologians as being the ones dissenting from the magisterium, we're now talking about conservative or traditionalist or orthodox, or however you want to put it, theologians as the ones dissenting against the magisterium. So where do you see kind of in the modern era, like 2026, if you were to point to like, this is the most dangerous thing in the church, like we're, all hands on deck, be careful, warn your grandma about this, warn your friends, like what is that sort of issue?
Goodness, that's a huge question. If I said youth unemployment, that'd be too obscure of a Pope Francis reference.
True, youth unemployment.
Gosh, that's a great question. I mean, sin is too generic of an answer, but that is honestly the answer. Like, we talked about earlier, the young restless reform movement within Protestantism. What stopped it? Well, the individual sin of the people who are the most known certainly had a major role of curbing the enthusiasm for it. And so when we crash out, when we fall into sin or tear each other down or anything like this, I think it has a tremendous devastating effect. Like we make it not look attractive. I mean, this is Jesus in John 17, the high priestly prayer. He prays that we'll be one so the world can believe. That when we are acting in this way, where we are just ripping each other apart, this does enormous damage. And for some reason, there is a movement within the church that wants to find the bad, even in allies, even in people. And this comes up in the most obvious, egregious way in response to the Pope. That Pope Leo has some amazing stuff. His speech to the Spanish Parliament, I really enjoyed it today. And he is proclaiming these things that in Spanish society and in most Western society are in some ways very countercultural, and yet proclaiming them with the nuance and the attractiveness. There's a 7-minute standing ovation at the end of it. I mean, he tells them they need to care about the seal of confession, about the unborn, about the least of these, and so on. But then equally significant is the only person I saw who wasn't clapping was one of the politicians from the party Vox, which is like the alt-right or far-right or whatever kind of party. And so it was remarkable because 10, 15 years ago, there would have been some far-left politician who would like refuse to clap for the Pope. And so I think that there is this movement. I was looking at the numbers of how many people agreed with Pope Leo on the Iran war being an unjust war, which, by the way, it certainly is.
Yeah.
And just polling wise, there is a huge percentage within the Catholic Church that has taken their moral formation from the president rather than the Pope. And without meaning this as a knock against Donald Trump specifically, if you take your moral formation from politicians, don't be surprised if you end up with them for eternity. That's like, these are not a famously like morally exemplary class of human beings. Now, there are some very good politicians. I don't mean to deny that, but the amount that we've allowed our sense of morality and then even of theology to be shaped by party identification and everything else is enormous. So this is, again, in some ways kind of a maybe general answer, like, of course, but I think that people taking their cues not from the Vicar of Christ, not from the magisterium of the Catholic Church, but from their preferred figures online, or worse, their preferred politicians, is going to be tremendously damaging. It already is tremendously damaging. We, who hasn't had a loved one who has gone like way too far down the rabbit hole of listening to some, pundit or something like this, and you've seen it warp their vision of the world. That's the kind of thing that we have to, I think, watch out for. And along the way, you will find people who realize how successful of a model it is to pick apart everything the Pope says. It'll get clicks, it'll get views. People love controversy. It
Yeah.
sells. And it will do tremendous spiritual damage to the people viewing it, and will be something for which the people creating it are judged eternally.
I think it's very strange. I mean, not, I think that you're right in what you said, but I think it's strange and interesting to appeal to, like, obviously the MAGA cultists, because as somebody under the age of 30, I don't know anybody who is like an actual MAGA cultist, like in my age group. Like I don't know a single person. Like when Pope Leo came out with the Iran war stuff, like obviously in my IRL friend group, like I'm the person to talk to about that, and they were like, "This is so awesome, this is great." And these are far right people. Like these are not liberals by any stretch of the imagination. But these people, the MAGA cultists, they need to be spoken to as well, and need to be evangelized as well, and need to be corrected as well, for sure. But it's very interesting, sort of for the under 30 crowd, how foreign the MAGA cultist uh, sort of ideology actually is.
Yeah, it's remarkable. There's a YouGov survey from back in April that said Pope Leo XIV's views on the Iran war have more support among Americans than do Donald Trump's. But when you look at it broken down, the disturbing thing was basically that Catholics were more skeptical of the Pope than atheists were. And now, granted, I'm not giving
Funny.
major props to the atheists. They just liked what he had said about Iran because they don't like Donald Trump, not because of any kind of principled reason. But so they're going to do what they're going to do. But among people who, are faithful Catholics, the number who still kind of ignored the Pope when it was politically disadvantageous is something to watch out for. Because I mean, you have the open, obvious dissent from people, and that's obvious. That's an easy thing to address. But if you find yourself habitually disagreeing with even the prudential judgments, I think that's something to be very cautious of. And if you're understanding the Pope primarily in secular political terms, I think that is a huge red flag that you don't understand who he is or what the office of Pope is actually about.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to sort of think about the fact that 2026 is a year in which, the midterms, and I think especially this is going to be the case in 2028, where politicians' fidelity to the temporal judgments of the Roman pontiff is actually going to be a political conversation. And
Yes.
I think that we ought not to, and this is something that, I've found to be especially important throughout, my few years of content making. You ought not to let cultural moments like that lapse. This is when people are interested and they're actually thinking about these sort of things. Like a huge cultural moment where people were thinking about Catholicism was the papal conclave. That was a great example. There was a sort of once in a blue moon opportunity to actually talk about Catholicism and to emphasize the glory and the antiquity of Catholicism. And people actually watch and listen from various backgrounds, atheists, agnostics, Muslims, Protestants. These people are actually interested in, like, okay, what the heck is this? This is really cool. And I think that this is something that everybody in this sphere, and even, you guys think that, oh, I'm, random commenter on Twitter and YouTube. Like, what can I do? Being part of the commentator, the commenter army is actually very useful in these sort of endeavors. Is that's actually what kind of spreads out the message quite a bit, is people commenting on it. So being prepared to take our opportunity to, push this into the forefront when it starts to get talked about, and to clarify things for people, and to get people sort of interested in it, listening about it. I think this is going to be a golden opportunity, probably more so in 28, but when these opportunities start to present themselves, make sure, you're ready to have as your end the conversion and the salvation of souls in how you're actually commenting on these issues.
Yeah, I think that's very well said.
So sort of the next place that I kind of wanted to go, and we kind of have to need to rapid fire against these, are your various controversies.
Okay, let's do it.
And you're the various controversies you've had. I mean, we've touched on some of them, but I would be remiss because frequently I'll have these very enjoyable conversations with people, and then I'll always have people in the comments complaining that I didn't, put somebody on the hot seat and ask them about their controversies. So the first controversy, the first one is the recent Jewish controversy. So I just labeled it as the Jewish controversy in my notes. Better than labeling it the Jewish question, but it's the controversy. So when it comes to the whole Benedictine college thing, the Zionist sort of conference thing, I actually don't know much about it. I've been paying too close to attention. The Christ is King is Jewish thing. Like, what is going on there?
That's a nice open-ended. Okay, so it was my talk or the conference, or what? Which way do you want me to go?
I guess the best way to go in my mind to like really sort of discuss the issue is, what did you say? Why do you think it's controversial?
Yeah.
And how have people been misunderstanding you?
Okay, great. So my talk was of itself. I thought it was I've had this happen to me twice. I gave a panel discussion at Benedictine on I was part of a panel discussion, something about men and women, and was completely expecting to be eaten alive from like feminists because I was on a college campus. And it was like my brain just didn't complete the circuit. Like, oh, this is Benedictine College. Like, that's not the direction people are going to have critiques. And so like no one was like, you're a sexist. People just wanted to make sure I was, I guess, based enough or whatever.
Things are changing, Joe. Things are changing.
I absolutely. This is one of the things that is apparent to me now when we talk about the changing nature of the world of apologetics. So here, like what I'm arguing for is the phrase Christ is King, although it can be used in an anti-Semitic way, because obviously anything can be. I mean, using something with an intent, like obviously it's the nature of language. But it's not inherently that. And Christ is King actually has this beautiful history and makes sense in the light of Judaism. So that if somebody is objecting to you saying Christ is King from a Jewish background, you can say, look, it is well established within Christianity and in Judaism that God is the King of the world. This is what Rosh Hashanah is celebrating at the head of the year, that God is King of everything, and that the Messiah, the Son of David, shares or will share in this divine kingship. So that the Christ is King is something that Jews and Christians believe. The only difference is we believe the Christ has come and they believe the Christ has not come. But there's nothing in principle objectionable about the phrase Christ is King unless it's the is rather than will be.
Yeah.
And so once you put it in that, it changes the whole nature of the debate. And this can be very helpful in having productive conversations with practicing Jews, rather than people just getting upset and imagining, because for many Jews, their first encounter with the phrase Christ is King is probably someone saying it to them in a mocking or dismissive sort of way. And that's not the most effective way to do evangelization, obviously. So what are more effective ways of presenting the truth of Jesus Christ? So that's what I'm arguing. And I don't think that should be particularly controversial. The pushback is, no, it's not. Or if you're saying this is Jewish, then you're a Judaizer and you don't think Jews should convert. And all of that is just absurd as a misunderstanding.
I think that line of critique is definitely stupid. I guess a question that I would have, and I think this is a really huge crux of the matter, because, I'm sure you probably saw Gideon Lazar. He had a conversation with the Catholic State guy who most people would describe as an anti-Semite, as an anti-Semitic person. So I think a lot of the the genuine concern ends up being that little word anti-Semite or anti-Semitism.
Right.
And it's obvious abuse. And, it's similar to the word racist or racism, just being willy-nilly sort of pushed out there. So what are your sort of thoughts about people who would take it in that direction and
Yeah,
say, well, I just don't like to use the enemy's terms, and to
sure.
call things anti-Semitic or anti-Semite, call people anti-Semites, because a lot of these people are, genuine. They're taking positions that are lawful within Catholicism. They're faithful, holy people. And I don't think we should just, assume the worst of them when they use phrases like this.
I think with both anti-Semitic and racist as an accusation, if you see it applying to everyone, you're overusing it. If you see it applying to no one, you're probably underusing it. Like, because there are people who hate the Jews in an irrational and unchristian way.
Mhm.
I mean, I had the strange experience when there was the original Twitter post of the episode. There were a bunch of comments accusing me of being Jewish and just claiming I was a fake Christian and I was a secret Jew, and all of these kind of just really unhinged kind of critiques, followed by people telling me anti-Semitism wasn't real. And I was like, are you reading any of the other comments? Like, this is an incredible kind of blindness. And so I don't mean like, here's some reasonable critique and, Jews are wrong about this or whatever. Obviously, that is totally fine.
Mhm.
But there is also a visceral, hateful kind of reaction that is sub-rational. And it's okay to recognize and call that out without, so I'm sensitive to and totally agree with the fact that anti-Semitic is sometimes used in an unfair way to, for example, silence any criticism of the state of Israel. I have been critical of the state of Israel on my channel and been critical of dispensationalists for, supporting Israel in this really bad way that is rooted in bad theology. So I shouldn't be someone that you think is like, oh, this is just like a fervent support Israel. I'm going to put the Israeli flag next to the American flag behind me in the next, setup here. That's not the kind of approach that this is coming from. So I get, people who just said like, oh, well, you shouldn't call everything anti-Semitism. Some of that is going to be a just sort of a disagreement on terminology, but hopefully we can get to, well, if someone is Jewish and their encounter with the phrase Christ is King is people mocking them as Jews on Twitter or wherever, but probably Twitter, whatever you want to call that. I mean, anti-Judaism would be a more accurate term since it's not about Semitism. But whatever that is, we can separate Christ as King from that thing. So whatever term would be better there,
specifically in the context of because I think that we need to distinguish like an act from what might motivate other acts, because like the big thing would be the denial of the event from the 1940s that I don't want to say on a YouTube live. Like, there's nothing inherently hateful towards a certain people about taking a historical position on this or that issue. Obviously somebody might be motivated by hatred of some person or group of people to take this position. So when it comes to that's the sort of the classic example,
right?
But when it comes to specifically the context of the Benedictine college debacle with the different students who posted and wrote interesting quotes and such, would you say that inherently like what they were saying would imply or necessarily be motivated by hatred of a certain group of people that we call Jews or Semites?
Let me see if I can find it depends partly which things we're talking about that they said, because they said a lot. It was 2 pages of stuff, and some of it no, but some of it yes. I mean, some of it seemed like it was, what was it called, like the coalition against, I don't know if it was called the Coalition Against Jews, whatever it was. I mean, it was something that they didn't seem like they were running from the charge of anti-Semitism based on the way that they had sort of framed it. It was called Coalition of Catholics Against Jewish Supremacy. And the content of what they're saying there is a mix of saints quotes, some of them taken out of context.
Yeah.
Theological claims, some of them more or less defensible. And I'm not making a judgment on the heart of the person who does that. There is something weird about it, though. I mean, I don't know. Like if I just said some other thing where somebody disagreed with me theologically, they might have said something in the Q&A. But this time it was like they got together and anonymously printed up a 2-page thing and put it on the doors of professors. And that's a totally different reaction. There's something really odd about the way that that's happening. Now, I don't think that's entirely on the students, if I'm being totally frank, because I think that this is a conversation that people are uncomfortable having publicly and openly.
Yeah.
Partly because there can be consequences for it. You know, the fact that you couldn't refer openly to the thing you wanted to refer to a moment ago.
Yeah.
And so I do think that if you suppress the conversation, it's not effective. The thing that comes to mind actually is one of this might be a new controversy. The push against modernism in the aftermath, or like beginning with Pius X and then following, largely didn't work in the Catholic Church. Meaning like a generation later, you have more modernists and not fewer.
Yep.
Because they just went underground and their arguments were largely not answered. And so you've got these seminary professors who are teaching Thomism and then reading German higher level critics. And there's no one responding to Boltmann. There's nobody responding to the people undermining a lot of the reliability of the Bible and everything else. Or they're just saying, no, you have to believe the Bible's reliable, but they're not doing the actual work of showing why you can believe that, or, and so this is the danger, is that we create this thing where there are real errors that are being made that need to be answered, and they need to be answered lovingly, like any error. And rather than presenting the truth in love, we're just sort of stifling the discussion because, frankly, for many people my age and above, there's something really baffling about it. Like the first time, like when I was exposed to anti-Semitism as an idea, it was always just like, this was a way people used to be. And, you'd find out, oh, like this is the area I'm in right now. One of the developers of it, if I'm not mistaken, originally it was segregated against blacks and Jews. And you're just like, that's so weird. Like the Jewish part in particular, like what is going on there? And because, anti-black racism was very much alive still as I was coming up in the world. Anti-Jewish discrimination wasn't. So then to suddenly see it, and to see it from the left and the right, partly because of like Israel's behavior in places like Palestine and Lebanon and Iran and whatever, and partly from other issues as well, there is a lot of whiplash where I think established Catholic institutions don't know how to respond to it, don't know what to do. So I don't think the answer is to just suppress it. I don't think that's effective, but I do think that there need to be good engagements with and pushback with it, because the idea that whatever ideas you have at 22 are just like the full unvarnished correct view of the world, that's usually not the case. So probably these ideas do need some pushback and need some nuancing and need some further explication, and we just need to have that conversation in a more honest and transparent way.
I totally agree. I think a lot of the sort of issues that I've had is that these sort of discussions aren't able to actually happen. And, I get accused of all crazy stuff when I want to even bring up a sort of mild presentation of some of these ideas. Because, like, if we're being perfectly honest with ourselves, a lot of the notions that are being spread, they do have a genuine lawful form that can be affirmed by Catholics. For example, when it comes to the opposition between world Jewry, and on YouTube I'm using quotations when I say that, and the Catholic Church, like that is a long-standing idea within Catholicism. And the question of, okay, how, since it is a long-standing issue, and I haven't seen a condemnation of this as such, this is a illicit position people can, hold to. What are the actual bounds of this. Like how do we affirm this while also holding into everything else that the church has said, over the last few decades? I think a very interesting study that I have to get kind of give a case study of this was the whole question of the deacidal curse.
Yeah.
And reading into medieval sources and scholastic sources, they illuminated a lot, how the church ended up receiving, a proper way of even speaking of the deacidal curse. And, a proper way, maybe even some may argue, of reading Nostra Aetate in light of, the scholastic tradition. Like that, in my mind, is a super interesting insight that I've gathered, from my studies on this topic. And there are similar insights to, other things. Like, for example, there's a lot of discussions on the right wing about race. Like, how are we actually going to, interpret this in the sort of bounds, giving people a sort of healthy outlet that's within the bounds of Catholic orthodoxy, that just doesn't lead people into a sort of fervent, mad hatred of people, which often happens, when there isn't an appropriate discussion about these sort of issues. So, like, coming from, I guess, more of the like the right side of this, if you want to put it like that, although I don't think it's necessarily helpful to speak in those terms. Like, I totally agree with the a lot of the insights that you've put forward here. Is that this is just something that kind of needs to come out and air out and have a public discussion. Think about, like, any other issue. What are
Right.
the bounds of talking about purgatory? Like,
Right.
how far can somebody go without contradicting the teaching of the church? Like, that's an appropriate discussion to have. And I think it should be similar when it comes to other issues, with obviously pastoral and spiritual insights into how these things can be affirmed or not.
There's something that Pope Leo said on immigration that I think is actually a good standard. And I'm going to badly paraphrase him here.
Yeah.
But he was talking about how this was, I think, on his Africa trip, basically that the ideal should be to build up places in the global south
Mhm.
so that people don't feel the economic and social need to immigrate to another country. Because overwhelmingly, you don't grow up in a place being like, yeah, I'd love to leave everyone I know behind and
Yeah.
start over somewhere else. But your country and culture is broken in some way from internal or external pressure, or you're not safe there, whatever the situation is. And so he presents this perfectly reasonable sort of position. And then he talks about the ability of nations to have national sovereignty and borders and all of that stuff being, legitimate goods. But then he talks about the imago Dei in the immigrant. So, within the issue of immigration, there's a wide range of positions you can hold as a Catholic. But what you can't lose sight of is that the individual immigrant, whether here legally or illegally, is made in the image of God and needs to be treated with love and respect, and that Christ died for them, and that you should treat them as your brother, and even be servant to them. That sort of approach, I think, is a good kind of lodestar, that you have the kind of broad social question of what do we do about this situation? What do we do in our relations with country X? What do we do with, racial situations in the US or ethnic groups here or abroad, or whatever the situation is? But throughout it all, it has to be led by Christian charity, where we avoid reducing the other person to a kind of caricature. And that's not just true at a policy level, but how we think and talk about it. And I'd say there's even a sense of that within partisanship, where you treat people of a different party or a different political affiliation in this kind of two-dimensional sense. And there's something that's really spiritually destructive about that, and can really hinder evangelization. One of the things that I was reminded of at the Benedictine conference was there are people like Gideon. There were people like Avina, who are these converts from Jewish backgrounds. Dr. Feingold, who's a fantastic Thomas. He was one of my professors at Kenrick. And if we're having a conversation that is perceived as hateful towards ethnic Jews, that can be a real hindrance towards ethnic Jews converting to Catholicism. Like, we are then putting an obstacle where one shouldn't be. And so whatever that conversation looks like, I think it has to be led with a a Christian spirit, both for the people involved in the conversation and for the people who may be observing and for the people who may be being discussed in the conversation.
Yeah, I think that I totally agree with that. I think that that's also something that needs to be emphasized for a lot of the people taking these positions as well, is like humanizing the, online right. Is a lot of these people, they're genuine, upstanding citizens, they're hard workers, they're intelligent people, and many of them have come to these positions through genuine conviction and, love of country, love of family. And there can be a very dehumanizing and weaponizing turn
It's true.
against the right wing that treats these people as, all of a sudden I'm going to, just because you have expressed X position, I'm going to call you a bad Catholic, or I'm going to say that you hate Jews, or I'm going to, say that you hate immigrants. Maybe that's more of a, left wing anti immigration point, but I think it's analogous for sure. And what I would definitely like to do, there's to give a slightly different example. There was a priest on Twitter who was being very dismissive towards young men and the desire for a lot of young men to avoid occasions of sin against the sixth and ninth commandment.
I think I saw that fight between you and he,
Yeah, yeah.
or you and
And
him.
what I found to be most frustrating is the accusations against the young men is really what you have for a lot of these people. They're not saying these things and doing these things necessarily because they hate women or whatever. And, they're incels, whatever the frick that's supposed to mean. They're not doing that for these reasons. For a lot of them, they're doing it because they want to stay chaste. They want to obey the law of Christ. They want to grow in grace. And they realize the destructive effects of placing themselves in occasions of sin. And they go on Twitter to blow off steam about it. Like, oh, it's so frustrating that I have to go through all of this to avoid occasions of sin. And to have a priest kind of go in and just like browbeat about it is like, okay, that this is just not helpful towards people. And there really kind of needs people to, stand up to that sort of, I think, negative tendency against these individuals. And for a lot of the right wing, in the sort of Catholic sphere, like I see myself as in many ways, taking the devil's advocate on some issues, and on other issues, just kind of maybe the non-devil's advocate, because I do think that a lot of these people, if I guess I'll put it like this, a lot of them are very pious and well-seeking young men who, over the course of time, I'm sure their views will sharpen. They'll come to understand things and the nuances that comes with, time and maturity. I'm sure this is something that will happen. And, the constant sort of like browbeating and exclusion and rage baiting is a huge thing. Rage baiting against these people. I think that it's just not helpful. Not that I'm accusing you of any of those things.
No. I think you're making a good point. I want to sort of nuance maybe.
Yeah.
There, I think this is okay. Just in terms of massive shifts, there is. I'm trying to figure out where to begin with this. Okay, the Great Awakening, the sort of giant political movement with everything related to companies deciding they weren't diverse enough and needed to increase their diversity and work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of the consequences of that people haven't talked about very much is that this wasn't something that most companies affected by firing the C-suite and getting rid of all their executives and diversifying that. The
Yeah.
way they improved their diversity numbers was that they stopped hiring white men, and so that your resume was sort of DOA. And there's studies showing. I mean, this is
Yeah.
Hollywood is obvious with this, but a lot of just the corporate world. So the people who are about 10 years younger than me, or maybe, so I came of age. I was in law school in 2008 when there was a big recession. And so the people who were like a few years older than me had a very cozy first year where they were making like bank, and it was very easy to get a job. And then suddenly, like halfway through my time in law school, the jobs kind of dried up, and the market got really scary. And sort of analogously, there was a huge cultural shift where suddenly the job opportunities dried up, but not for everybody, for people based on their race and ethnicity, while they were being lectured about their privilege. And so just calling this out, that part of this is recognizing that there is not just this amorphous um, great white male interchangeable kind of thing, like Jeff
Yep.
Bezos doesn't give us dividends because we look like him, and we don't look that much like him. uh, that's and so as a result, you've got these guys who are frustrated and getting lectured consistently about a lot of different things, and I get the frustration, and I think it's something we're going to have to figure out a better way forward with. I heard, I don't know, I don't remember who told me this, that every Mother's Day sermon is like, women are amazing and wonderful, and every Father's Day sermon is like, step it up, dads, what's wrong with you? And partly this is based on a real difference between men and women, that we like a challenge more, but there is a need to actually be encouraging and be supportive. Like there is a need to actually recognize, yeah, things are hard for young men coming of age where a lot of the world has an irrational hatred of them, where they're surrounded by temptations to sins of the flesh, where they're on the cusp of not knowing if they're going to have a job because of things like AI and immigration and the economy and a bunch of other things. And maybe having some compassion for the people involved in that is good, without having to just endorse every angry outburst they might have. So all of that is one part of it. The other part, like talking to faithful Catholic women, I know they're often very discouraged about the dating prospects because they see guys becoming radicalized and weirder online. And so I think there is part of the conversation should be log off and like go do something, um, and you'll be a better person. But that's easier said than done, depending on where you are. Like I live in Kansas City. There's a lot of opportunities here for young adults to get together and meet and do things, but there are other places where it's really difficult. So all that's to say, I feel a strong sympathy for people on both sides of the question, and I think we have to approach issues of modesty in a way that is both respectful of the weakness of the flesh and not demeaning to women's dignity. If a lot of women are of an age where they weren't taught the same standards of modesty, and there's not an intent to provoke, and so speaking in a way that respects her dignity as well, it's tricky to do. It's tricky to have a multifaceted conversation on an issue like this online, and the online space doesn't really reward it. It rewards a hot take that is one sided.
True. True. Um, Kind of moving from those controversies, man, I have 7% battery. So moving, the danger zone is here. I kind of wanted to discuss as a last point before we get into questions. I guess we won't talk about any of the Protestant controversies, more of the inner Catholic controversies, because to sort of present the perspective of a lot of this sort of under 30 crowd, um, the way that they sort of see, this is why Catholic Ink became such a popular meme. It's because it actually was something that played on a pre-existing suspicion, might be the best way of putting it. And this suspicion is basically that when it comes to the Catholic content sphere, this includes obviously Catholic Answers and all of Catholic Answers contributors. This includes, Matt Fradd. This includes Lila Rose. Basically, all the upper echelon, millennial types. Is that there is actually a sort of deliberate and unflinching effort to push out people that don't have complete intellectual homogeneity, with that crowd, and that if somebody were to come in, let's say they take theological takes that are, slightly more trad, or if they have, a disposition maybe towards morals that's more trad, they'll get called a Pharisee, or they'll be accused of all of these things of, adding things to the church and teaching as their own opinions, the opinions of the church, whatever. They get accused of all of these things. They're not necessarily, received. And, the sort of the golden boy of the Catholic Inc. was supposed to be voice of reason. That happened. And then now it's sort of like Catholic Inc. 4-alarm fire. And, it's all going to die and burn down. Like this is sort of like the general understanding of, the Catholic Inc. question. So when it comes to, I guess, the chief assumption, which is a sort of intellectual homogeneity, as somebody within, Catholic Inc., how would you sort of comment on that?
It's a good question. I think I'm not as aware of some of the stuff, to be honest. I mean, sometimes I'm usually finding out about controversies because I'm reading about them, not because I'm seeing the kind of lead up to it. The two sides are, you don't want to mislead people. And so if somebody is a net negative, or they if they're really outspoken on something where they are actually misleading or misrepresenting what the church teaches, I think you have to be cautious about putting some daylight there, of not just endorsing. And that includes, even if it is an accepted theological opinion, I do think there is the need to say, here's what the church teaches, here's what theologians often say. And just making those distinctions can be very helpful. And resolves, as I see it, most of the controversies. Like, you don't have, you take Thomism. I went to the Angelicum. I'm pro Thomism, but sometimes people present the Thomistic position as the Catholic position, and it's not. Depending on the situation, and sometimes it's not, I should say. And in those cases, I think it's fine to say there's differences of opinions theologically, but this is the one that I think is correct, and here's why. And I think if you do that accomplishes a lot. I mean, Carlo Broussard at Catholic Answers is very Thomistic, and I don't see anybody kind of pushing him out. I think the danger is, or maybe not danger, but the perceived danger, at least, is not with having an opinion that isn't official church teaching, but in whether it's presented in a way that's likely to confuse someone or make them think it is church teaching, or likely to kind of turn people against the church. And so I think there's probably a difference to a certain extent in just at a prudential level, and how much you do the sort of, I don't even know the right term for what I'm looking for here. Worrying about the intellectual health of your side, so to speak, can go too far, where it leads to the kind of constant infighting because nobody's like pure enough. But on the other hand, if you don't have any of the kind of checks and boundaries or anything like that, then the thing can be overrun by the loudest, least accurate kind of voices. So, take an example that we would probably both agree on. You get some really motivated, guy who is a passionate Catholic, but he doesn't understand Protestantism very well. And so he just makes these really unnuanced kind of claims about Protestantism. His heart's in the right place. He's a good guy, but he's probably doing more harm than good. I think in that situation, like, Catholic Answers would not want to do an institutional kind of partnership with him, where what tends to happen is, institutionally, we are as good as our worst take. We are as good as our worst argument, and people will drag the entire organization, everyone who's ever written for Catholic Answers, if like one bad article appears that is unnuanced. I'm not saying we've only had one bad article. We've had more than one. But anytime we have a bad article, it's like that's a reason to reject the entire Catholic Inc. And the whole Catholic Inc. idea, as I understand it, is basically, non-Catholics do that with all of the Catholic Church. So we have to be a little bit careful about who's in a position where they might be understood as representing the Catholic Church, because if we don't have any kind of quality control, not only are bishops and institutions going to be very wary of us, but also potential converts are going to be very wary and say, like, I don't think I can trust these people, etc. So I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question.
punches right a little bit because like I'm thinking of two particular examples, one of which is some of the discussions surrounding purgatory, and another one is certain issues of, sexual morality, where it feels like rather than kind of going in and stating, well, these are the Catholic positions, the church hasn't made a definitive judgment on this matter. You can hold any of them. The sort of approach is this is the church has not judged on this matter. Therefore, the laxest possible position is kind of what is presented as like this is, if you say anything beside this, if you try to argue for anything beside this, you're adding burdens onto people's conscience.
Yeah, I think that I don't think it's a left right thing, but I do think it is a lax thing, meaning trying to avoid Pharisaism. And, I mean, to give an obvious example, I don't know the particular things you have in mind, but I'll just take the example of meat on Friday. Yeah. Clearly, the church doesn't require meat on Friday outside of Lent in the US. Nevertheless, it is good and people should do it. So how do you present those two things where you're calling people beyond what they're required under pain of sin to do, where you're not just saying, here's the bare minimum, just do that. But at the same time, you're not treating this as a binding moral obligation when it is not.
Yeah.
That's like the tightrope that's a little bit hard to walk. And I think from an apologetic standpoint, probably there is an inherent tendency to tend towards the more lax position on some things, because you are trying to like it's easier to defend purgatory than it is to defend a particular iteration of purgatory from an apologetic standpoint, right? Like that's just genus versus species. And so there can be, I think the risk there might be, and I'm not speaking of any particulars here, just as a general principle, you can run into a sort of unintended Mott and Bailey problem where you want to take the easiest to defend version of the thing, but the real thing might be more nuanced than that and richer than that. And it's worth spelling that thing out in its richness. This is actually, I think this is another area where Ethan Muse is giving me some hope, because one of the tendencies is apologists don't go hard in the paint on apparitions usually, because you're free not to believe in an apparition. So you don't want to like spend a ton of time being like, you have to believe in Fatima. Even though Fatima totally happened and is amazing and there's great evidence for it, we often kind of leave that alone. And I speak of myself in this as well. Not often like an intentional sort of thing. My usual response if somebody has an issue with an apparition is, you're not required to believe that. Also, I think it happened, but it kind of in that order. And maybe the order should be the other way around. But that's, I think, the issue. I don't think it's left, right. I think it's just when you spend your entire life trying to explain and defend the faith, the tendency can be to just say like, okay, what is the part that has to be defended? And what are the parts that, like, almost think of like a space shuttle, losing everything that is extra weight. Even if it's good, even if it's true stuff, you're just like, well, what is the thing that has to be defended for the Catholic claim to be true?
I think that's a very salient point, actually. An analogous example would be when you are debating with Protestants or others about how we read certain church fathers. Like recently, I've been reading a lot about St. Augustine on concupiscence, for example. And there are a lot of contemporary Catholic views and Catholic scholastic positions that have been permitted by the church that totally contradict what St. Augustine says about concupiscence. But then on the other hand, when it comes to the dogmatic bounds of the church in certain school positions, they actually are in line with what St. Augustine says about concupiscence. And it becomes very difficult because when you try to present this point, to a Protestant audience, let's say, I'll have, a bunch of people in the comments like, what the heck? This isn't what I heard about concupiscence. This is weird. Haven't you read this section in Trent? Haven't you read this condemnation from the popes? And it's like, yes, I have. I'm just presenting a certain position on concupiscence because this is a position allowed by the church that is in line with St. Augustine. So there's a lot of different issues that are like this.
And I think that's one of the weird things is that with the internet, conversations that might have been in a particular closed context where you kind of knew who you were dealing with are now you're speaking to everyone, whether you're intending to or not, and so it can be very tricky to do that well. I
Yeah.
did want to give a shout out. Somebody said something really good that I should have mentioned. There is a hunger for rigor, and you see that in the numbers. Like people want to be called to more, and I
Mhm.
think the trick is just doing that in a way where you're very carefully not saying everyone is required to believe this, but this is good, and you're not required to do this, but you ought to. You aren't required to do whatever, but this is a good thing to do. Uh, that's really helpful, and I think that there's a hunger for greatness that especially young men have, and a hunger for magnanimity, and we don't want tepid and watered down. I hope I'm not giving tepid and watered down, but being able to say like, yeah, do this. This is a helpful thing to do without without making that false step of saying the church requires you to do that.
Yeah. And yeah. Oh man, there's a few comments that
If
are
by the way,
kind
if
of
your
like
battery dies, can
exemplifying
I just
what.
take over the stream? And I don't know how that works. I'm
Yeah.
just gonna go black.
If I die, well, I guess I could just, here's what I'll do. I will unplug my camera and I'll just be like a little emoticon over here. My
Don't you
my
do an end of the
like
year fundraiser? Do you just do this kind of stuff to make people want to? You didn't have YouTube Premium before. Is this you just do these
true.
poverty
This is
streams
actually
so
this
that
is just a way for people to think that I'm like completely destitute.
yes,
But no,
poverty streaming. All
it'll
right.
I can just switch over to where my camera will be off, my mic will still be connected, and my computer will be charging because I want to go over these comments before I leave
Okay,
so I
sounds
don't,
good.
be unjust towards these people. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep,
Okay, good. I'm gonna grab my mic.
got better looking.
You're funny.
I didn't know if you could hear me. I was
Okay,
hoping I'd sneak that one in there.
so this is the punching right sort of thing I'm talking about. Kryptonite 1825. There's also an opposite, like people who try to push all the babies go to hell stuff. Well, like you can't sort of claim and sort of push the, oh well, let's restrict ourselves to what the church definitively teaches and kind of say, well, accept the Augustinian position on this. Like you can't really
Sorry,
do
are you
that.
saying massa damnata, like babies go to hell of damnation, or
Well, I
it's
mean, I
limbo?
think they have the Penny Domini because I'm a Thomist, but like
Yes.
to say that the infants have the pain of sense is for a long period in the church obviously was the majority position, and it's still a permitted position. And actually, this is something noted by the document of the International Theological Commission. They note, I think, from Pope Clement XIII, that this was a permitted position in the church even long after Florence, which is kind of an Innocent III, which are two sources people try to quote against it. So it's like, on the one hand, yes, I don't accept the Augustinian position. Like I actually don't. I'm a Thomist. But you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say, well, like we can say that the really mean positions aren't allowed to be taught, but when it's like the cooler positions we're allowed to like have some, leeway with it. You got to be consistent all the way around.
This is an area where the history of that particular question, I had thought Pius IX was very clear that in order to have damnation, you needed personal moral sin. That original sin by itself was not sufficient, and therefore infants couldn't be damned in the proper sense. Although, again, as you say, a lot depends on what do we mean by hell? What do we mean by damnation? Is the loss of the beatific vision enough to describe that as a kind of damnation? Or is that a more confusing and inaccurate way of describing limbo? But yeah, I think the general point that you're making of there is this sort of, well, theological opinion is against it on things that read as more rigorous. I would add there's one part we didn't talk about here.
Yeah.
Jesus is harder on the Pharisees than he is on the tax collectors.
Yeah.
And so there's a sense in which I think some of what happened, because people complain like, oh, the church is harder on SSPX than they are on the German bishops. And there's some truth to that. But there's also, I think, several other confounding factors that make that a little more complicated. And I want people who are orthodox theologically, to be held to a higher standard. And I would include myself. So I think it's okay to say people who know this stuff well will be held to a higher standard than people who don't, and that probably has the effect unintentionally of as you say, kind of punching right in a certain way.
Yeah, I think that's a fair enough point. I mean, maybe the German bishops case isn't the best example because, to be honest, the SSPX question, I don't even want to like really get into this into much
I'm trying
detail.
to create more controversy.
Yeah, true. You're trying to get me to actually stop avoiding the SSPX question because I avoid a lot of details about the debate. Um, but like substantially, I would say that the SSPX, you go into an SSPX uh, parish and you hear the sermon, like they're preaching the Catholic faith, and somebody could hear that sermon, assent to what is being said, and have presented to them, the sort of essentials. The articles of the faith are being very clearly, communicated to them. Perhaps, and I think it's totally reasonable to say, and I agree with it, that the SSPX preaches errors, and some of which I would say are censured errors. But when it comes to the German bishops, they're kind of just like, I don't even like it. Could we even refer to this as the Catholic faith? What a lot of these,
Oh no, I mean
priests in
that's
Germany are
like
preaching,
their errors
like
are
sparkle
worse.
unicorn
Their errors
religion.
are worse in terms
Yeah.
of a lot of this stuff. They're not getting excommunicated, and people want them to be. And this is also, I guess, one other issue that goes along with that is they know how to play the game better.
Yeah.
Where they, so I'm going to give a second Redeem Zimmer shout out in this stream. I didn't have that on my bingo card. He calls it retreatism, that conservative Protestants tend to just withdraw from institutions rather than fighting for them. And we have a sort of similar thing where, the SSPX are concerned that Vatican II documents permit of a heretical interpretation.
Yeah.
And many, I think, would say there can be a reasonable interpretation of Dignitatis Humanae that's consistent with prior magisterial teaching, but we don't know if that's what the church is teaching or not, so we're seeking clarification. But rather than just saying we're going to assume the best and we're going to continue to preach according to that understanding in line with prior magisterial teaching, it's like we're going to separate unless you clarify to our satisfaction that you mean the thing we hope you mean and not the thing we hope you don't mean.
This is where I think Father Lucian is so important, because Father Lucian, he makes the point that when it comes to the more important hermeneutic, it's like a very funny point. People don't really think about it. The more important hermeneutic for interpreting magisterial documents isn't the acta of the council. It isn't the discussions that preceded the definition. It isn't the drafts of it. It's actually the previous magisterial teaching.
Yes.
Like that is the most important hermeneutic. So this is why, I know he's a coworker of yours, but why Jimmy Akin's comments about desuetude is so frustrating for me is the sort of idea of, basically it seems like magisterial presentism is, when we have Dignitatis Humanae, something said 500 years ago, we can kind of ignore that because it hasn't been repeated in the last 80 years. I think that actually just is a very fundamental and far-reaching destruction of the most important hermeneutic for reading magisterial documents.
I'm gonna abstain from any jumping. Partly I have not followed the whole controversy with Jimmy. I've seen you guys cross swords a couple times, but I've not, to be honest, followed any of those very closely. But I will say, yeah, like a hermeneutic of continuity. That I know that's not Benedict's actual phrase, but it's a good one. Mm-hmm. And recognizing the consistency there. But the point I'm actually making is sort of how do we react in that? Not just what is the right interpretation, but in the event you don't know which interpretation is meant, what do you do? And the German, and if you want to say like the liberal Catholic position, is you stay and fight for the thing you believe in. And so often the conservative position is to just retreat and quit and go into schism or threaten to go into schism. Yeah. And that is both politically foolish and spiritually suicidal. Mm-hmm. So one of the reasons, in other words, that the German bishops get treated differently is they controlled the churches in Germany. And we don't want a situation like we saw with the old Catholic Church, where you take a bunch of churches, so for those who aren't familiar with the whole back and forth, Vatican I, the churches that didn't accept Vatican I, they went into schism. And those churches today teach all sorts of crazy stuff. They went from being, more rigorous to like way more liberal. I mean, it's kind of the version of you finding out that Anti-Pope Michael is pro-married priests, and just say, like, once you accept no authority, then you end up going from like, I'm too rigorous for the church, to I'm just calling the shots, and it's going to look really idiosyncratic really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. There's actually a funny Pope Francis moment where he's making fun of them for having female bishops. It's just like a hilarious Pope Francis moment where he's like, well, they tried to keep tradition without the magisterium of the church, and look, they have female bishops now.
There you go. I didn't know you'd done that. There we go.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so thank you for going to the liquor store to celebrate this stream. Thank you, David. Excellent guest, Wagner. Thank you. Joe, where can I get that shirt?
This is a state secret. No, I'm just kidding. What is it? Oxnit, OXKNIT.com has all sorts of really crazy shirts, and I really enjoy them. And unfortunately, my algorithm knows I like them, so it shows me the same shirt over and over again until I finally crack and think, like, I'm going to buy that.
Interesting. I don't know how an individual gets into such colorful and
you get one, and they kind of know people who would do this. They know better than we know.
True. Okay. Well, my phone is now, my computer's now at 18%, so I can actually turn the camera.
Hey, can we do a
on.
quick poll in the comments as to whether people want that?
What do they want a poll of?
Whether they should have you back on screen or not?
No, it's okay. I am the
Fine.
I am the stream. I am the stream.
Welcome back. Oh, you got a lot oranger. All right.
Did I?
The lighting looked different for a second.
Oh, I think it's because I haven't put out blackout curtains on my windows in here, so the lighting will slightly shift near sundown. Although it's only 8 p.m. in North Dakota, so it's not that close to sundown. Sun doesn't get down till like past 10. It's kind of absurd.
True.
Actually.
Yeah, the latitude's crazy.
Christian, okay. Christian, what are the common errors you see when apologists explain purgatory? Joe, do you agree these are errors? Aiken argues this is doctrinal development.
So I have not followed that whole back and forth. Can I just say something very general?
Yeah.
Recognizing that there is some kind of belief in purgatory in the fathers, some kind of belief in purgatory in, like the Jewish Encyclopedia talks about it, and the rabbis, is very effective from an apologetic standpoint in helping Protestants see that they're the weird ones, because they've been under the impression that we are weird for having this idea of purgatory. And so then when you're like, no, this is totally normal. This is why people sit Shiva, and you pray for those who have died. That, from a rhetorical perspective, is really effective in getting rid of one of the intellectual objections many Protestants have to purgatory. The particulars of what purgatory is like are not unimportant, but I want to make sure that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot where we say only if a person affirms purgatory understood in this way can we point to them as, for evidentiary support, because there is a vaguer form of purgatorial belief in some of the fathers and in some of the rabbis, and being able to point to that, I think, is really helpful.
I think the difficulty comes in with something that you pointed out about trends in apologetics earlier, is that for a lot of Protestant apologists, they have gone from, critiquing the existence of purgatory as such. They've gone from that to now claiming particular details that have been taught authoritatively by the church, and maybe even conceding as a matter of argument, like, okay, sure, let's pretend that, this state called purgatory is correct. Well, this is what you said at this council. This assumes, the debt of temporal punishment. That's a stupid, ridiculous idea. We'd never hold on to that. And while I very much sympathize exactly with what you're saying, and if I was talking to basically anybody like in real life, this is how I'd explain it to them. If I wasn't on the internet right now talking to the internet, I would never bring up these points. But for a lot of Protestants, we can think of the gambit of Protestant apologists now. They've kind of shifted the burden from, let's talk about the existence of this. to actually let's talk about this niche question about the nature that has actually been, determined in some way. I'm not going to comment on how, but in some way determined by the church. So therefore, let's say I concede the Pope. Well, I'm not going to concede Vatican I on, universal jurisdiction.
Right.
Let's say I concede purgatory. I'm not going to concede this point about it. So I'm very much sympathetic to what you say, but I think there actually is a valid point here in mentioning this.
Yeah, I mean there is certainly, I mean, in the niche stuff, a time and place to say, yeah, I'm going to defend like in part two virginity of Mary.
Yeah.
The normal person hears that and they're like, "What are you guys talking about? This is insane."
Yeah.
And then you're like, "No, this is church teaching, and it's really good." And this is going from the milk to the meat. But I do think we have to be careful with that. And frankly, I think a lot of the Protestants who want to push the conversation in that direction, it's hard to accept that as good faith.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that really your issue with purgatory, or is that really your issue with Mary's perpetual virginity, or is that really your,
Yeah.
or are you just looking for a weak spot? And so part of that is like, okay, look, let's just not miss the forest for the trees. And those are situations where I do want to call it back and say, whatever you may think of this, you are going against like the whole weight of how early Christians understood what happened when you die. And like you're defending something that is way harder to defend historically than, satisfaction in purgatory or whatever. And so just trying to take it back, because I see one of the trends in apologetics is that when we're not careful about that, you will have these better read Protestants who just jump on that and create these things that are, confusing for people. I liked your response video, third mention to redeem Zoomer, on John 6 and transubstantiation, where you talk about the different, forms of mastication. But that is, again, one of those things where an ordinary person is more likely to just be confused.
Yeah.
If I tell someone I want to talk about mastication with them, they're just like, no, thank you. I don't know what that means, but I'm uncomfortable already. So, having a sense of like the audience is very tricky, and recognizing when people are finding a weak spot rather than making a good intellectual objection that seems like rooted in a real.
What's so frustrating about this as well is a lot of these objections, because it takes such like granular details about the doctrine and then assumes like a completely self-defeating and hypocritical methodology about something as simple as, what constitutes a proof from the church father, what constitutes a refutation of this doctrine from the fathers. It becomes like so much more difficult to actually have these conversations. And I think that there needs to be, a proportional response, from Catholics when it comes to like taking them on their own terms. It's like, okay, this is, and I've actually, funnily enough, I've had this experience multiple times where people will, they'll come up to me and say like, hey, this video is really impactful for me. And they'll like mention the video, like, oh, well, what do you think about this? And basically the idea that they'll put across is, oh, I didn't really understand half of it. But the very fact that we had such like a granular objection to the Catholic faith and we had like a sufficient response to that, that's a huge motive of credibility for a lot of people.
It's true. I just had somebody telling me that today, a Protestant who is actually a donor over at my Patreon, shamelessjoe.com, just throwing it out there for the sake. But he was just saying how blown away he is, where every time he has a question, this is something the church has some kind of answer for. So even if he isn't immediately moved by the answers, and I had the same experience, even as a kind of a laxer Catholic becoming more serious about the faith, was, every time I think I've had an original thought, somebody else has already gotten there and maybe shown why that thought doesn't actually work. There's something really amazing about that. And so I think that is actually really good. If there's a way to present that, particularly with that spirit of, isn't this cool? There's so much more here.
Absolutely. Thank you for both of your wonderful work. Thank you, Big Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Big Steve.
What's your opinion on the state of anti-Islam apologetics? I don't really follow it that much, but yeah, the counterproductive by only appealing to modern morality. tired, one note. Yeah, it's kind of my experience with
I like the Islamic
anti-Islamic
dilemma. I
apologetic.
think the questions about like, here's this gross stuff that Muhammad did is opening yourself up for like, hey, people in the past often were okay with things like girls getting married at younger ages and we're comfortable with.
Yeah. I think a lot of those arguments end up being um, very rhetorically persuasive for a lot of people, but intrinsically, it's much more difficult to actually provide like a demonstrative proof, on these points. But yeah, it's a lot of this stuff. It's really annoying, one sided for sure, counterproductive for sure. I would like to see, because I think that something that was new to the scene was bringing up scholastic Trinitarian theology. I think that caught a lot of people off guard, especially a lot of Muslims off guard, and they didn't really know kind of what to do with it. I think that was through the efforts of my friend Astro. He was.
I have not followed this at all, so I have nothing intelligent to add here.
Oh, okay. I'm just saying. I think that was something which was. That's what I mean when I'm saying that apologetics kind of needs things that are like new, fresh,
Oh yeah, no, I agree with that
innovative.
for sure.
If responding to Trinitarian objections using scholastic Trinitarian theology and actually taking that seriously, as a way of viewing the Trinity and the way of answering objections, like that's something that was very new, very fresh, even in like the history of Christian Islamic dialogue. Like a lot of the dialogues between Christian and Muslims, you read them and they're like 9th century dialogue on the Trinity, and you're reading that and you're kind of like slamming your head into the desk of like, there's no way these people actually said these things. I mean, they may have, but when it comes to these different traditions, these different opponents, if you want to put it like that, enemies to the church, like having sort of a new, fresh, solid way of responding to it, I think that's something that a lot of up and comers should strive towards. And I think that a good example of that was definitely the scholastic Trinitarian stuff against Islam. Should we spend time addressing online virtual reality church/cults? Many of them use the hyper grace theology like Joseph Prince did to justify some weird stuff. Talking about like Roblox church.
I don't know enough about what is happening here. Okay, I will say this as a general principle. When I'm deciding if I should respond to something, I always look at the view count, because sometimes people send me things and it's just some weird corner of the internet they've found, and it's like 200 people watch this stream in 6 years. And you're like, okay, that probably doesn't need to go to the top of the pile. But if it's something that you're familiar with and you can say why it's wrong, then respond to it, like that. This is part of the earlier conversation where like the niche apologetics has an absolute place. Like if you're the person who's the best informed about online virtual reality cults, then maybe you've got yourself a channel right there.
That would be, honestly, if somebody came out with like a huge documentary style piece on virtual reality church, like Roblox churches and cults. I think that would get a pretty huge. I would watch something like that, because it's just like, that's so crazy to me that I need to hear about what is going
Yes,
on.
exactly.
Like, what are all these schizo degenerates doing in these Roblox communities? I need to know about it. That would be, actually, if anybody's out there and has the means and the wherewithal, that would actually be like it's a very good idea for like a well performing video for sure. But I would never do that. I think regrettably, people have forgotten that states are not moral actors. Politicians are, in and of themselves, part of the state apparatus. Okay, I just
That
fundamentally
was from
disagree
back
with
in
this.
the political discussion. I would say there's a power.
There can be structural sins and there can be
Yeah,
structural
right.
virtues. So
Right.
fundamentally,
States can be good or bad, and they should be rooted in the kingship of Christ in such a way that they encourage and promote virtue.
true.
Leo actually talks about this in his address to the Spanish Parliament. I mean, he doesn't explicitly settle all of the questions in like the integralism controversy, but he does at least point to the fact that whatever your conception of the state is, there's certain moral duties that you owe to the human person, and so we can talk about this from a religious perspective, and that part of human flourishing involves the faith. Sorry, I'm going to just pull it up because he had a great line.
I need to read that address. I actually haven't read it yet.
Oh, it's quite good. But he talks about like human good is not just some secular conception. So when we talk about like the common good and the good of the individual and all of this, that this includes the like a proper understanding of freedom. Here we go. He says, without confusing the legal sphere with the moral one, it is also worth recalling that freedom must be understood in its fullness. Being free does not simply mean being free from coercion or having many choices. It means being able to recognize the good and commit to it responsibly. Like that is a very good, succinct corrective to a misunderstanding of freedom, including a misunderstanding of religious freedom. That therefore, he says, for this reason, every truly free society also requires a proper limitation of public power, so the freedom of individuals, communities, and associations is not unduly restricted. So kind of turning the conversation in that way. All that is to say, a completely secular conception of the state that doesn't recognize man's highest end is inconsistent with the nature of true freedom.
Yeah, this is literally the first line of Dignitatis Humanae. This declaration leaves unchanged the social obligations of the state and the obligations, I think, of the individual towards the true religion.
Right.
And when you read the catechism, it's like right there. It says we need to limit, there needs to be a limitation to religious liberty that is in accordance with the exigencies of the common good, not as imagined, I think, like in a subjective or an indifferentist way, but according to the objective norms of the good. Like that's pretty straight there, that it's not like an American, constitutionalist First Amendment notion of religious liberty. Like we just as Catholics don't believe that. And, that makes us retrogressive in many ways that would make quite a few people upset if the implications of that were drawn out in more clarity.
Yeah.
I just had to sit. I just said James White and Joe shop at the same shirt store.
That's the biggest comment James White's gotten in a long time in Catholic spaces.
My issue is that these things require mature discussion. True. Wagner on screen takes away from my focus of Joe's shirt of many colors.
Well, fortunately, he was off screen for a while.
True. I gave you guys a little break to focus on.
Little break, yeah.
Thoughts on the ortho bro in the polemics? Okay. I hate deliberately broad and vague questions.
I mean, I can give a couple thoughts, I suppose.
Thoughts. I hate that when somebody asks you like, oh, what do you think about World War II? Thoughts on World War II? It's like, okay. Thoughts on Catholicism? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I am happy to see a lot of Protestants looking for greater depth in history and tradition. And a lot of the ortho bros we're talking about are former Protestants. And I don't think that's a coincidence. They're former Protestants who often have a lot of baggage towards Catholicism and a certain style that they carry over into being totally Orthodox. And it doesn't match up with people who actually grow up Orthodox. It doesn't match up with people who are raised in that. And so it is a unique sort of phenomenon. And it is very much young guys right now in a way that just doesn't actually seem demographically sustainable. Like the 2-to-1 male to female ratio can't last. Like either a lot more women need to convert for this to continue for the next generation, or it's going to burn out in sort of a young, restless, and reformed sort of way. And one of the dangers of having a movement that is a lot of bros is that it can become it can fall into the same things we talked about in terms of the Catholic subculture, where it can become guys speaking and talking in this way that doesn't actually glorify Christ. And I think that's worth calling out. I know Jay Dyer just said he was going to step back from online apologetics or whatever.
Yeah, Jay's scared. Jay, why are you running from these debates, Jay? Why are you running, Jay?
But I mean, I don't know. I watched like 3 minutes of him doing a debate review of my debate with Doug Wilson, and he was just like, this guy's a goober, he's fat. And I was just like, I'm getting dumber listening to this.
Dude, that's my entire comment section. It's over.
So I was just like, man, if you really don't know who I am, I don't know how much you follow Catholic apologetics. And if you do and are pretending not to, come on, man.
Yeah, old Jay. Dude, he's a sweetheart underneath all of the rough exterior.
I mean, I think he probably is, but it just is like, I mean, at a certain point, I'll say this as a 40-year-old guy, there's a reason I don't just try to hang out and impress 20-year-olds.
Yeah, I guess this is true. But also, I think what you're forgetting is that the Ortho Bros are going to be flirting to convert here soon. It will bring many women into the church through flirting to convert.
Cool. Good luck, guys.
Okay, you'll see. You'll see, Joe. You'll see. You're doubting them, but I think that's silly to doubt them. Joe, do you think inadmissible death penalty?
Yeah, I've said that publicly before. I think the fact that paragraph 2267 can be read either as saying every pope prior to Francis was wrong and this is a per se evil, or it's inadmissible because of the changing technology, which I think is actually the better read. This is something where clarification from Pope Leo could go a long way. He very adeptly, he had an airplane interview where they asked him about the German bishops, and he explained why their proposals were wrong. And in the course of that also mentioned the tutti, tutti, tutti line from Pope Francis and how this is an invitation for everyone to accept the cross. And it was just like, yeah, that's right. And once he says it, you're like, yeah, this is a thing people had really weaponized this line out of context. And the Pope is just saying, here's the proper interpretation. And it clarified it in 5 seconds.
Yeah, you've heard of recognize and resist, Joe, but you ever heard of avoid and ignore? That's because I think there actually is something to it. Is
avoidance?
You may say this is like throwing away your brain or whatever, but for your average person, like digging through 1,000 different, like Hassan did, God bless him, like a 4-hour live stream with me, going through literally everything that has been said since like the 1960s on the death penalty and explaining all of this contextually. It's like, okay, that's fine, but there's dozens of issues like this. And I think everybody can kind of admit that there is a sort of looseness with the way in which the church has presented her teaching that can be very confusing for people.
Yes.
So for your average faithful Catholic, avoid and ignore seems like
I think that there are times where Leo seems to have a sensitivity to this and will give a clarifying, even if it's just a couple sentences. He got pushback for saying we need to move past just war theory since it doesn't work very well in the modern context. This is, by the way, something that a wealth of theologians and popes have said for the last 80 years now. But then this was understood as him like saying that the medievals were all wrong with it, and he made it clear that we're talking about the change in weaponry and everything, that if you now have a button that can destroy most of the world, that changes the calculation for whether you can ever morally enter into an offensive war. And Ottaviani
true,
talks about how you can't. That was in like 1940.
Dude, Ottaviani is so awesome. He has the famous Vatican decree on the Index of Forbidden Books because people, this was actually one of my most controversial takes of this year, was that people should probably just stop reading heretical literature and watching heretical videos because, from my experience with most people, they're not able to, actually safely interact with these things without.
I think that was a good take. I will co-sign that. I watched that. And at the time, I wasn't 100% sure who you even had in mind, because a lot of what
everybody
I see
in mind.
Frankly, I do think that in the marketplace of ideas, Catholics are winning. That when you have really good Protestant videos and really good Catholic videos, the groups that I see are three. You see Catholics saying this is great. You see Protestants saying the Protestant one is great. And then you see Protestants being like, I should become Catholic. And I just have not seen much of the opposite. Like, I don't, a lot of the mission of the major Protestant channels responding to Catholicism and raising Catholic objections isn't let's get a bunch of Catholics to become Protestant. It's, hey, I know you're a low church evangelical and you're thinking you need to become Catholic. Let me give you some reasons you can stay Protestant. Like that seems to be explicitly or implicitly what the channel is for. And so it's like, yeah, if that's where we're at, where we both know an actual formed Protestant or say an actual formed Catholic isn't going to become, like mainline Protestant
Yeah.
because they watched a Redeemed Zoomer video or something. It's like, yeah, obviously. But
Yeah.
I've been challenged by this because I talked to a guy who said that he was like doubting his faith or struggling with his faith because of it. And I just told him, like, stop watching this. Like, obviously, you don't know theology well. It's okay. You can just not watch it. Like, that's
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people underestimate, and this is sort of why the idea of the free marketplace of ideas doesn't sit too well with me,
Mhm.
because there's a tendency to underestimate the sheer power of original and actual sin, and the lack of cogitative power that we have due to our own finite limitations, due to time limitations, natural limitations, the defects of the body, whatever else it may be. So it's a very, very difficult for abstraction to occur, because it's very much, it can feel violent against our nature, to get where we gather information from the senses, to actually abstract and think about arguments objectively. So, I mean, for me, like, the general advice I give is like, oh, you have this problem right now. Okay, let's go through this problem. Now just knock it off. Like, stop making problems for yourself. I think it's generally good advice. There's a reason why
Mhm.
the Index of Forbidden Books was a general precept and
Right.
was applicable unless otherwise noted, because your average person, they need these sort of guardrails. And Ottaviani, the reason I brought him up is because he explains this wonderfully in his note on the abolition of the Index of Forbidden Books. He's like, look, guys, all this means is that this is no longer an ecclesiastical law. This doesn't mean that there aren't sort of morally equivalent precepts of the natural law about not reading heretical literature. Like, that still exists. And you need to be extra vigilant now, actually, to guard yourself against what might possibly be dangerous to faith. And the sort of glut of information that is present to every person, of obviously varying degrees of quality, and the sort of natural imperfection. Well, by natural, I mean, in the sort of way in which we now experience nature, not nature as such, but the sort of natural imperfection that we, have in the intellectual sphere. Like, I cannot in good conscience give a sort of general recommendation of people of like, hey, you should watch sort of Redeem Zoomer, or you should watch
Right.
Jordan Cooper or Gavin Ortland or whatever. I give the general sort of advice of, you shouldn't watch that unless X, Y, and Z.
Right. You have to have like a motive to do so. So if you're, and so someone who's doing, a lot of my channels,
Yeah.
I have to just watch a ton of Protestant stuff where my job is to do
Yeah.
that. But you're right. Like, people who are doing this, especially doing it recreationally, what are you doing?
True.
Like, that's, and I feel doubly this way. What is that panel show? I know Trent's been on it a couple times to present the truth, but
Oh,
it's,
yeah, the one with all the prostitutes on there.
yeah, I was gonna say, if it's something where there's bad ideas and
Yeah.
temptations to sin, that's two reasons
I
not
actually
to.
respect Trent a lot for like reposting them and then like blurring out all the
Oh yeah,
women.
totally.
I
And
think
I
that
think he
that
does a
was a
good job
cool
of, I
thing to
think,
do.
being mindful of that. Now, I know I saw people in the comments saying, well, he sits down with like gay extra. I did as well. But it's different when you are right there to confront a bad idea. Like, this is the idea behind debates.
Yeah.
And putting, like, being like, oh, look at this video this person did. Oh, people are saying it's the whatever podcast, but the first time I saw 3 different people just say whatever, I thought they were just being dismissive. A real who's on first moment there. What was I? Oh yeah, like an actual confrontation where you are answering an objection. It's okay to do that. Like, presenting those ideas in that context. Like, against heresies was for a long time our best explanation of Gnosticism.
Yeah.
But it's in the context of showing you why Gnosticism is wrong. So I'm fine with sitting down with someone if you're directly saying, like, I disagree with this person. I want to give them a fair hearing and then show why their argument is bad. I think that's a real apostolic good. But I don't think it should just be recreational viewing.
Yeah, the recreational viewing, there's actually a story of St. Robert Bellarmine that he used to literally tremble when reading the works of Luther and of Calvin, because he was just so fearful that he would fall into heresy, because heresy is such a dangerous contagion.
Yeah.
And I think that there's definitely a loss of the sense of faith that happens in a lot of Catholics when they, treat it as if this is just, in an indifferentist way. Like, while they may not be speculatively or intellectually indifferentists, practically they are indifferentist. This is something. Actually, I won't even bring up how this applies to the SSPX, because I would get in a lot of trouble from that comment with that comparison that I just made attached to it. Okay, why is Gregory Palamas a saint in Eastern Catholicism when the essence energy distinction isn't compatible with Catholic dogmas? I don't know if Joe and I have different answers to this, but
You go first. I'll find out.
well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying essence energy distinction. Like, there's nothing wrong with saying that. Like, everybody agrees. It is a condemned thesis of certain medievals that there are no distinctions in God. Like, we believe in real distinction between person of the Trinity. We believe in a certain type of distinction between the attributes of God. However, different scholastic schools may express this. There's nothing wrong with saying it, essence energies distinction. There are scholars that dispute exactly how Gregory Palamas, you almost called me. I almost said the saint in front of his name. But how Gregory Palamas actually expresses his view on this matter. Like, some will say it's basically the same as, it's an epinoetic distinction. So that's basically the same as a virtual distinction. Others will try to compare this with, the interpretation of Scholarius, which is that this is basically Scotus's distinction. And others will say, no, this is actually, expressing a real distinction between essence and energies. And he actually thinks that there are beings really distinct from the divine essence that are eternal and uncreated, which would obviously be anathema in Catholicism. So there's the point of interpretation, sure, but the point of somebody being a saint in Eastern Catholicism, one, that's not even true. That, like, to speak of Eastern Catholicism as if it was like a uniform body. Like, sure, there are certain groups within Eastern Catholicism that venerate him. And two, like, when you're using this term saint, you have to be careful, because when the Eastern Catholics call Gregory Palamas a saint, they don't actually mean the same thing as when we call Thomas Aquinas or John of the Cross a saint. Like, Thomas Aquinas and John of the Cross, they were established as a saint for the universal church with a precept to worship this individual. And therefore, almost all theologians conclude that this is an infallible act of the church. Whereas when it comes to these sort of like local saints or local canonizations, this isn't somehow like authoritative or binding on Catholics. There can even be like pretty serious errors when it comes to what the church may permit in local context when it comes to worship and discipline. So I don't think it actually, like, a lot of people will play this up of like, oh, well, Gregory Palamas is canonized.
Nestorius comes up a lot.
Yeah, Nestorius will come up a lot, whoever else. But this really doesn't actually mean too much for Catholic ecclesiology that you have local individuals who are venerated. We can bring up a million different, locally venerated saints if we wanted to.
The other thing is, it's also possible for even a saint in heaven to have bad takes.
Yeah.
Like, it is fine to say this person was saved and we respect and venerate them for these things they did very well. So, for example, the Byzantine Menaeon describes our Holy Father Gregory Palamas, Archbishop of Thessalonica, and then it mentions that he is famous both as an ascetic and a theologian. So it's possible, for example, for someone to have a bad view in their theology and to still be an overall good theologian and also be a good moral model in terms of how they model asceticism. That we're not endorsing every aspect of theology. Now, in this case, Gregory Palamas is most famous for the essence energies distinction. And then it comes into the question, which is well beyond my own competency in terms of what he means by it and whether that can be harmonized with Catholic theology. But I would just say, yeah, in addition to the non-infallibility of local and, sui juris canonizations, that this is also shouldn't be read as a complete endorsement.
Fair. Um, yeah. So, for example, this would lead one to the conclusion that one would not be able to accuse the Eastern Catholics of heresy for this, for example.
Right.
Um, to specify Eastern Catholics accept the distinction. Yeah, and this sort of thing of like Eastern Catholics accept this, Eastern Catholics accept that. Like this is another interesting point. I don't think I don't know if you've noticed this, Joe, of like Eastern Catholicism becoming like a thing via the
Yes.
internet.
Yes. You know what
It is
term wasn't around when I was a lad?
Eastern
Biswarping.
Catholicism. Well, but like Eastern Catholicism as like, oh, well, Eastern Catholics believe this, and
Right.
Roman, asterisk, Roman Catholics believe this. One, it's pretty ecclesiologically and theologically and liturgically stupid to speak of Eastern
Yes.
Catholicism as if it's a monolith. Like there are some
Get
of
the
these
Chaldeans and the
traditions.
Copts in a room together and then tell me they're all the same.
True. There's like, why would the Eritrean Catholics care what Gregory Palamas has to say? Like, there's literally no reason why they would care. Like, why would the Syriacs care what Gregory Palamas has to say? These various different groups outside of like Eastern Europe. Why would you even speak of them as like accepting what Gregory Palamas had to say? Like, you might as well speak of them accepting, what Scotus said or what. Like, it's a random theologian from a different tradition. So like I don't like that. And also like there's not there's distinct theological expressions when it comes to Eastern Catholicism that the church has spoken of very clearly. But to my knowledge, the church has never spoken of like distinct theological theses that are like uniquely Eastern Catholic theses that are like binding on like it's sort of ridiculous to even speak in this way of like Eastern Catholics accept X. And this is opposed to, or at least diverse from, what Western Catholics accept of anything except like a mode of expression.
I mean, there is a general, since we can talk about trajectories in like historic Antiochian and Alexandrian schools, but right, when you universalize that and treat it like everyone who lives in this geography or is of this ethnicity or this rite must agree, or this church agrees on these things when it's, church in the small c. Yeah, I think that's a mistake.
Okay. This is a fun one. You guys are really putting the fun ones before us. Is active participation in a non-Catholic liturgy intrinsically evil, or can it sometimes be justified? If so, to what extent? Okay. If you are actively participating in anything repugnant to the Catholic faith, or in any way participating in such a way as to give scandal to another, you're sinning. I mean, it's kind of like the basic. I'll just leave it at that. Because, like, for example, I guess I won't leave it like that. So, for example, praying the Our Father with an Anglican, and or by extension, doing something like Pope Leo did with Evensong. There's nothing wrong with these actually, and there's actually an interesting statement under Venerable Pius XII, I think, where he talks about praying the Our Father with Protestants and other Christian groups during ecumenical meetings, and says that this is acceptable. So I don't know why this can't necessarily be extended to other devotions and prayers of the church that are in line with the Catholic faith. But the big thing is, like, I don't know how I would be able to go up there and participate in any, like, if I were to go with the Archbishop of Canterbury and have evensong, which I like praying evensong with the Archbishop of Canterbury. Like, I don't get how I can do that without implying some sort of scandal on the part of individuals watching, encouraged to indifferentism. So I think this is a very, very, very complex and difficult question. I don't know if you have any formed thoughts on this, Joe.
I unfortunately was thinking while you were answering, and I zoned out halfway through your own in terms of what you said about evensong. Were you saying pro or anti praying evensong with Anglicans?
I wouldn't do it. I would feel I would feel bound in conscience not to do it, because I think I would have a morally reasonable expectation that this would cause scandal amidst people who, they might look up to me, or they might know who I am. In
Yeah,
that way.
shout out. And I've already told you this story, but for people in the stream, I was giving a talk in Germany and met a couple from I think Albania, maybe Macedonia, and they had converted from Islam and said you were like their Catholic introduction to me. So I
That's
was
funny.
like, fantastic. But yeah, so I get that. The irony there is because the Pope is the Pope, he
Yeah.
actually probably has a certain freedom. Where if I go to a Protestant church, there's a non-zero chance someone's going to see that and think like, "Oh, did he stop being Catholic
Hmm.
and become Protestant?" If the Pope goes to a Protestant church, it's very obviously like this is an ecumenical gesture.
Yeah.
And so I think that the general standards I would say are number one, you have to be very cautious about the risk of scandal, and a lot of things can go into that. I can't remember who it was. Someone was telling me that their mom had converted from Pentecostalism and missed that kind of liturgical expression, and so she went back one Sunday in addition to mass. And when she got there, people she knew from the church were like rejoicing that she'd gotten saved from the whore of Babylon, and she was just like, all right, I got to leave. And so she just got up and left and never came back because she realized that like she was giving scandal by her presence there, where they took it to mean that she'd left the Catholic Church, where she just wanted to do this over and above. So that's one risk. Another risk is obviously don't receive communion somewhere where you're not in communion. Where this gets really tricky is when you have families where
Yeah.
one spouse is Protestant and one spouse is Catholic. And I think in contexts like this, just taking reasonable steps to um, to clarify, like I'm here because of my wife and not because I'm, renouncing the true faith or something like this. And those are really tricky situations to give a kind of one size fits all admonition with it, because you can do real damage to the family if you, and particularly a situation where, like, let's say the wife is considering Catholicism, but she's going at her own speed. That's something where I think you can have a little more flexibility there.
Hmm. Okay, but the two principles to remember to kind of synthesize
Oh yes,
everything
please
is
avoid
one,
scandal.
no scandal. Two, do not participate in things that are contrary to the Catholic faith.
Yes, so like communion,
Yeah.
but also if they're preaching something heretical or something like that. And in that context, sometimes you can have a good witness of just getting up and walking out.
Yeah, and okay, maybe I will give the SSPX example. So I used to go to a fair number of SSPX masses when I lived near Charlotte, which is not something a lot of people would expect of me, but I very much like the traditional Latin mass, and I found the community to be awesome. I wouldn't fulfill my Sunday obligation there, but I would just go there, and I liked it. But the preaching there, like the preaching was, Vatican II is awful, the Novus Ordo is awful, blah 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 blah. I kind of realized, I'm like, okay, well maybe I can go there and like sit through this and be fine. But like, am I really gonna bring my wife and kids to this? Like, am I really gonna expose? My wife, she's not theologically like inclined. She doesn't care about that stuff too much. But am I really going to, have the priest, who's an authoritative figure, kind of go and talk about all these things that might be confusing when it comes to the mass and an ecumenical council? And I think that that's like a good expression of a
Right.
good example actually of a genuine case of this might actually cause scandal in like somebody else. But yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a good follow-up question somebody has about weddings, and I think that's a good context where there's not an expectation that you are agreeing with the
Mhm.
theology of the venue for a wedding. Like it's very common that there are non-Catholics at a Catholic wedding and vice versa. And there's just kind of a social expectation. So that does seem to me, at least, different in kind. But obviously don't receive communion if they offer it. Then yeah, also, this is just a free aside. I have people I love. We actually just had dinner with an SSPX priest last Sunday, but the SSPX, the amount of time you'll find society homilies and resources and things about Vatican II, about the Novus Ordo, etc., kind of seems like we have main character energy. Just gonna say it, that just like the number of times Protestants preach about Catholicism, whereas I've never heard, as far as I can recall, a Catholic homily about like why you shouldn't be Methodist or something.
It is super annoying because I kind of want to, like, if I could go to an SSPX mass and they're just like preaching on, the virtues, or they're preaching on,
You just want to hear someone preach manualism.
True. No, I mean,
You're like, the formal cause and the material
no,
cause of this are.
not like that. Not like that, obviously. Like, if I wanted to do that, I would just like not go to the extra mass and just read at home. But like, if like you just had like good like homiletics, they're preaching like a St. Alphonsus, or like a St. Francis de Sales, or a St. Charles Borromeo. If you had something like that, and then the traditional liturgy, and they had these like difficult canonical and jurisdictional questions, like I might be able to, it concede my ignorance on the canonical and
Sure.
such, and just say like, okay, well, I guess I'm going here. I will listen to whatever my bishop says about the Sunday obligation, and I'll go here as much as I can because this is solid everything. But just like, you really want to go there and have like a pity party the whole homily, where it's just like, oh, the Novus Ordo sucks, and I'm never gonna say that. It's like, okay, you're an SSPX priest, we're in an SSPX chapel. Everybody knows you don't say the Novus Ordo. Like, who is this for? Like, who are you telling this?
Yeah,
like, are people there just like, I'm shocked, I've never heard this before.
I have had this issue even in Latin masses in full communion. So there was a particular institute parish I went to, probably 2 years apart, and both times I went, the homily was exactly what I remembered it from the prior time, about why we need to dress appropriately at mass and liturgical reverence and all this. And I'm like, look, who in this church needs to hear this? And as a general rule of preaching, you preach to the people that are there. I mean, this is something that they teach in seminary. Preaching about how bad other people are is actually really spiritually bad. It's really dangerous to just preach about like, I thank you, Lord, I'm not like these tax collectors, is a really bad homily. And so we have to watch out for that. Now, someone's going to point out, like, here's these two guys maybe guilty of that right now.
True.
But
oh gosh,
I thank you, Lord, I'm not like these SSPX. No, but
trust me, I am giving, that was part of an illustration. I was saying
hopefully
I'm not
one coming
like
out
these,
of a real love.
SSPXers, because of it was an illustration.
Yeah.
Trust. Can Catholics believe in conditional election? Well, it depends on what you mean by conditional election. Like, that's not really a question that could be succinctly answered. I mean, in a certain way, it's like obviously heretical and blasphemous. If you're talking about like conditional on the part of God, then are you talking about conditional on the part of grace, conditional on the part of glory? If it's on the part of glory, like everybody believes this. Like, it's basically like saying, can you believe in conditional election? Like, it's not like a precise enough question to ask, if that makes sense. Da Big Dog 1.
I think it's Da Big Dog.
The Big Dog? True. Is video game piracy a sin? I don't think so. I don't know where you fall in the intellectual property is real or fake.
I am really torn about a lot of this because, okay, so let me just spell out a few principles. One, intellectual property is real property, at least to a certain extent, but it has certain...
By intellectual property, sorry to interrupt, do you mean the right to publication, or do you mean like simply the information as such being like communicated or spread?
That the creator has a right to be paid for the enjoyment of their content under ordinary conditions.
Yeah.
But this is different than just stealing a book from the library, and that there's no pecuniary loss. So already is, so an ebook that you download that you were never going to buy, is that theft? Yes, but not in the same way that it would apply if you were just taking it from the bookstore. And in some of these cases, depending on what you're doing with it, if it's a permitted use, like if you're employing this for fair use and everything else, it seems like if there's any sin, it's really venial. It's really kind of de minimis sort of thing. And so with a video game, you're enjoying the fruit of something that you didn't labor for, someone else did labor for, and you're not rewarding them for their labor, but it's impossible to reward them for their labor because it's not being sold. And you've presumably exhausted all the legal means you can. So if the question is, can I enjoy this thing that I haven't paid for and I'm not harming anyone? I tend on the side to say that's probably not sinful, but it's a borderline case where this is probably where you would get a more rigorous and laxist view, because you are getting something for free that should cost money, but it's not your fault at all that it doesn't cost money, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I totally disagree about the ebooks thing, but
Wait,
kind of want to
which
get.
side do you fall on the ebook thing?
Oh, I think it's completely lawful to download them.
I mean, I hope you're right.
I don't think I hope you're right. Like for example, I don't think that it can be theft insofar as you're not depriving anybody of, the use. I think that there's a sort of intellectual usury that comes with the way in which modern publications treat digital resources. But that's
So part of it is the question of what are you paying for when you buy a digital resource? You're not paying for the paper like you are with a book.
yeah.
You're paying for the content.
Hmm.
And so then the question becomes, so actually a great example, Father Matthias Scheben's books, you can buy them from Emmaus for like $60, or they're available for free online. And the question is, okay, well, there's some work that's done there in digitizing all of that. And this is paid work someone did, but it's not the same as the paid work of, Scheben's not getting a cut of that.
So if I scan all the pages in my book, that's okay. Like I can scan all of them and send it to somebody. I don't get how that's different than me like mailing the book.
Yeah, it's a good question. And well, libraries and everything make this complicated too.
Yeah.
So Internet Archive, has been the subject of lawsuits, and it was super annoying because I used Internet Archive all the time, and then they got sued over having what is literally an online library, and it's not at all clear like what the kind of boundaries are. So this is an area where I think there's a lot of amorphousness,
I think
morally and even legally.
Yeah, I think it's because academic publishers are kind of stupid in how they actually disseminate information, and they really should seek a different model. Because
Yeah.
it's not like, because I hear the thing is like, oh well, you should be recuperating the work of the author in this Brill book, but then in reality, the author's getting like 10 cents for my purchase. It's like, okay, if I throw him a quarter, like, can I take two? It's
Right.
and then,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
really
Well,
academic
also a
publishers
lot of
adding,
so
like,
for people
pedigree.
watching this,
Yeah.
a good way around that in the very particular context of academic work is academia.edu. If you There's like a button you can push and you can ask an author to upload their work. You can also just email them and say, "Hey, I'd really like a copy of this thing you wrote for this book, but I'm not going to pay $120 for it. So can you send me that?" And if you've got like enough time where they can reply to the email, I don't think I've ever had an author say no to that.
Oh yeah, well, you're Joe Heschmeyer. This
Oh
guy's
no,
hood red 69.
It's when I discovered this. Well, not this exactly. Back in college, I was an undergrad. I was 22 years old. No one had ever heard of me. I was studying Indus Valley civilization, and I was really fascinated by the theories of a guy from University of Pennsylvania by the name of Dr. Gregory Poschel. And I emailed him, and I remember being like starry-eyed when he emailed me back. I was like, how in the world did Gregory Poschel email me back? And now that I'm an adult, I'm like, I bet he was so excited to finally have a student who cared about his theories about Indus Valley civilization. Like I was just imagining, I was like email number 550 of 1,000 that he'd gotten that day. I bet he hadn't gotten an interested outside party and outside of this tiny world in like a week. Maybe more. I don't know. So now I like as an author now, I probably shouldn't say whether I'm okay with people just taking my stuff in case
I don't know.
nobody
I
else
tell
feels a
people
kind of way
like
about it, but
if you can figure out how to do it, like do it.
I mean, we send
Like,
our
I'm not
stuff
going
as
to make it
cheap as
easy
we
for you.
can.
Like, I'm not going to upload it myself. Like, I'd rather you give me money. I'm not going to make it easy for you. But like, if you can figure out how to do it, like, I don't.
And certainly, if it's a question of I'm not going to read it or I'm not going to pay for it, then just read it and don't pay for it. Like that's obviously better.
Yeah. Okay. So beside that, we have 10 to go through. I'm back down to 4%.
Okay.
Over. Okay. Why does it matter if a Protestant? We're gonna have to speed run these.
Mm-hmm.
Why does it matter if a Protestant knows a text is inspired if they know it's infallible / credible? And why does this matter if they admit infallible things outside the Bible? Well, for the assent of faith, it's not necessarily sufficient for something merely to have the negative charism of infallibility, because to affirm that sacred scripture is infallible is distinct from affirming that sacred scripture is the word of God. Like these are distinct things in which we're assenting to. So to have faith in the supernatural reality of God's inspiration, this is something that needs to be testified to, because only those things which are revealed by God can be accepted by faith. That kind of like 30-second, just like pop,
Nicely
pop,
done.
pop.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. E. Michael Jones. Okay. Thank you. Evening, gents. You've both been helpful in my own faith and the faith of others in my life of baptism. Any thoughts on when the form and matter of the sacrament is separated? Words spoken in full when water washed?
You
I'm
mean
not
like
sure.
they say, I baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and then like 30 minutes later they pour water?
Well, it has to be like a morally united act is usually the standard that'll be given by like.
Yeah, I want to know if I
apologists.
understand what the separation is. Am I understanding his hypothetical?
Yeah, I'm assuming this is just a hypothetical. Like if somebody says the form and then baptizes like 30 minutes later, versus if somebody says the form and baptizes 5 seconds later. I mean, it's just a question of, is this like a single act? Like, are these two things morally simultaneous? It's not a hard and fast rule that like once it hits 3 minutes and 39 seconds that it's like you're cooked. It's just sort of like it's one of those things where you just have to use the judgment of prudence to recognize whether this is or this is not.
Okay. I think that's because, I mean, with the pouring, depending on how much water you have, you may not get through the whole in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Over, I
True.
mean, you can do a triple pour, but yeah. So I don't know. That's without having a better idea of it. I will just punt on that one. I hope that's all right.
Isn't the okay? Yes, it is the essence energy distinction. If you mean it in the sense in which it is articulated commonly, then yes, it would be contrary to this. Don't Eastern Orthodox use it to say we can't see the essence? Yes, they do, and they're wrong. Thoughts on Oriental Orthodoxy claim of being the one true church? Thoughts on that? I think they're wrong. I don't know about you, Joe, but my thoughts on them being the one true church is that they aren't the true church.
There's a document from one of these joint dialogues from, oh gosh, I can't. It's like in the 60s or 70s, where there's an Oriental Orthodox Catholic dialogue where they basically are saying, yeah, in the future, it would be great if the Coptic Church could have a way of having their rite and tradition and customs recognized within the Catholic Church. I'm badly paraphrasing again, but it was basically just an affirmation of like, we kind of know we're not we kind of know we're not them.
True. They were real for this. I agree. Agreed. A discussion with O's like Ajin and those guys would be great. I don't really see Oriental Orthodoxy yet. Like I'm gonna start. I've actually intended for a while to kind of do like I did on the Filioque and just read everything I can on Oriental Orthodoxy. I don't see them as being, one of those very important, legitimate threats to the church yet. Like it would kind of, in my mind, be the sort of like studying the virtual reality cult thing, is a bit of curiosity maybe. But I do see, but despite that fact of like what the reality is now, I do see like in the next 5 to 10 years, this is going to be something, and I've been saying this for a while, that eventually will become a thing that sort of needs to enter into the normal cycle of Catholic apologetics. And I think the biggest difficulty about it ends up being the fact that a lot of the resources about authentic Oriental Orthodoxy are non-English language resources. Sure. And basically what the dispute ends up becoming is, okay, we're going to like refute some YouTuber, and their understanding of Oriental Orthodoxy. And sure, I mean, there's value in that. Like people do refutations of Jay Dyer that are effective. But I think they basically are going to have the same sort of Jay Dyer problem of, Jay Dyer kind of makes up his own stuff and says that this is orthodoxy. I think that Oriental Orthodoxy has and will have to an increasing amount like the same exact problem, which will make it hard to have actual discussions with them directly and not sort of like polemical ones against their person.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think that's partly one of the growing pains is if you are the only or the by far and away the most public and most thorough kind of explainer of your particular church's traditions. And I think Dyer has been that for a lot of people in Eastern Orthodoxy. It can become warped to your idiosyncrasies, even if you are trying not for that to happen.
RZ reposted a clip of the VH of C saying Jews don't
VHFC?
VH of C, some dicastery head,
I see. Okay, yeah.
some woman.
Monse.
Oh, okay. Saying Jews don't need conversion and seems to believe she has magisterial authority due to her office. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's a bad answer off the cuff that I think Simone tried to get her to clarify in the back and forth. And as someone who does off the cuff comments, I know how easy it is to kind of screw something up where you just get something completely wrong. So I think if someone gave her the right answer, she would happily affirm it. I don't think that she's super in the weeds on this. And I think it's probably worth remembering for the under 30 crowd that most Catholics over 30 have spent way less time thinking about the Jews one way or the other and don't have probably a very sophisticated and fully formed thought about a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of get that, but also I don't think in my years of talking in front of a camera I've ever fumbled so hard to say like the Jews don't need conversion. I mean, that's pretty like that's a pretty big fumble. And I get it.
Yeah,
But
I
I
mean,
think the big thing is like it doesn't even really matter. Like this is just like a stupid rhetorical point from Redeem Zoomer. Like this is just like nobody who is a like well-formed, intelligent, reflective, abstractive person, reasonable person should think that this is anywhere near a good argument. Like, okay, some random woman who's like works in the communications department at the Vatican happened to say something a few years ago on a YouTube channel. Like, who cares?
right. I mean, she is a conservative Catholic Opus Dei person who had a bad take. I mean, put it in that context and try to get the line from that to therefore become Episcopalian or something or whatever, some kind of main line. Like, how does that work? Do they not say embarrassing things about people not needing to convert? Is that the solution? I mean, I just like give me an
But
actual
we think
argument.
that, okay, well, the difference is, Joe, that we think that the head of the dicastery department is infallible.
I guess
They don't
that's a
think
good point.
that Pastor Susan is infallible.
It is one of those things where it's like, man, when the head of the communications department becomes a PR scandal, first day on the job, that is got to be frustrating for the Pope. But
True. I mean, also, it's like, does the Pope even know though? Like, does he even
I
know
mean,
that
that's
people like
a
this
good
stuff
question.
out
It
there?
was a Twitter controversy, and I had to explain to coworkers who are too old for Twitter what was even getting people upset. And I only started using Twitter like a couple months ago because my Facebook now is just like old people and scammers.
True. That's all
By the
Facebook.
way, jumping back to what we said earlier about the Oriental Orthodox, the document I was trying to remember is a 1979 document called Principles for Guiding the Search for Unity between the Catholic Church and the Coptic Orthodox Church, and the protocol joint to the principles. And it was signed by John Paul II and Pope Shenouda III, the head of the Coptic Orthodox Church.
I always thought Shenouda was such a cool name.
Word. Principle number 11. Once unity is achieved, the richness of the various Christian traditions existing in Egypt would find clear and legitimate expression for the enrichment of all within the one Coptic Church under the leadership of the Pope of Alexandria and Patriarch of the See of St. Mark. So notice, even in this vision of the future, they have a protected right within the church that their guy is still the head of. They're not claiming to be the one church everyone on earth is meant to be a part of. They're just claiming to have a unique history and tradition and liturgy worth protecting, which is so much smaller than the Catholic claim. So it seems to me that once the head of their church signs that, it kind of is game, set, match, where we're like, we are the Catholic Church. We're the church founded by Christ, and everyone is meant to be part of us. And their claim is like, hey, we don't want to lose this cool Egyptian stuff that we have. And it's like, all right, I think we've come to everything we need to know. Like, you keep your cool Egyptian stuff and join the church.
True. Okay, Shredder. Actually, by the way, a lot of these Coptic Orthodox, they are basically like Coptic Sedevacantists. I don't know if you know this.
I don't know this.
They're like Coptic True Orthodox. Yeah, a lot of them say that uh, the synodal bishops have had heretical statements when it comes to Catholicism and Chalcedon.
Oh, because we were just like, maybe we're misunderstanding each other. And they're like, no, we really are monophysites.
True. Yeah, it's super. This is why like people ask, "Oh, Wagner, are you going to discuss this?" It's like, dude, I'm going to discuss Coptic sedevacantism. Like, really, this is what you guys, out of all the things I could talk about, this is what you guys want me to talk about. I've had discussions with some of these guys before in private. I don't know the intricacies, but I do know that a significant number are basically that. Okay, so wedding question we already kind of answered.
I'd actually give a different answer to those two. I wouldn't go to the one where one of the parties is a canonical Catholic.
Yeah, same.
But it is something where there isn't a stance that the church has taken across the board, but there is a defect in form. What makes it different from, say, like a gay marriage is that it is potentially valid. You can have a radical sanation, and you can have a healing of the roots. So you can have it retroactively, nunc pro tunc, applied canonically. So it's a little more of a subtle issue, but still, I think it's just better not to do it.
I love the TLM. I love the Novus Ordo. True.
Amen. I even like the Byzantine Divine Liturgy, just trifecta.
If communion expresses full unity in the body of Christ, why can Catholics sometimes be admitted? It seems very wrong. 1 Corinthians 10:17. So true. So true.
Yeah, the particular situations under it are when there is substantial unity that is still incomplete in some way, like the Orthodox. But those are hard questions, and certainly the norm is that we don't permit communion for.
I don't see how the law like applies to anybody outside of people expressing desire to join the Catholic Church. It's just like the law expresses the fact that this person, the priest, needs to discern that this person has the like upright and proper dispositions.
Yeah, I don't have the canon law in front of me, but there is something where you're thinking of the individual cases, and I think there's actually a class of cases where in kind of ecumenical gestures, like Catholic Orthodox is an easy one, where we permit the Orthodox to receive communion. They don't receive it because they're against it on their own grounds.
True, they're
but
real for that.
We would recognize the valid apostolic succession and everything else, that they are, even though they lack the fullness of unity, there's enough unity that we can permit a common Eucharistic celebration, and that can impel deeper unity. So getting to the 1 Corinthians 10:17 part of that, we are one body because we partake of the one loaf, that there is a certain dimension where if we intend ecclesial communion, Christ can complete that, and the Eucharist can be a helpful aid in that, I think is the theology towards that, because Paul doesn't say we all partake of the one loaf because we're one body, but the other way around, that sacramental communion creates ecclesial communion at its deepest level.
True. Okay, speed running the last 7. Hi, Joe. I'm the Orthodox guy that called in once to say why I'm not Catholic. Well, I'm Catholic now.
God bless you. That's wonderful.
W.
Very
We'd love
happy
to hear it.
that.
It was probably those ecumenical gestures that did it, by the way. So for all those rad trad seething, that was what did it. Okay, where do you see non-denom going in 10 to 20 years, especially with potential AI sermons?
Oh my gosh.
Many order Catholics falling into the North Dakota laxity in the South.
I read that as Notre Dame laxity in the
No,
South.
I'm just North Dakota
Oh,
laxity.
okay, I see it now.
So they're actually awesome. That's what he means to say. Actually non-denominational laxity. Because ND is non-denom. Oh, okay.
I
get it now.
Thought you got that originally. I'm tickled.
No, I did not.
All right.
So where do I see them going in 10 to 20 years?
Every time you think the low church
They're
cannot
still
go
gonna be
lower,
here.
it goes lower.
They're
Like
still going to be here. Like they're going to be. They might have like more schizo beliefs and practices, but they're still going to be like there will always be a desire in the heart of men for low church religion. Like every generation has had it since the beginning of the church.
Yes, I think there's also a kind of pendulum effect where the kids who grow up in that want something richer. When we see that a lot. That's a lot of the boom in Catholic conversions is really just people growing up and saying there's got to be more to it than this. And I think COVID actually had some interesting effects on that too. When, um, this is not AI, but when you have the digital form of this thing, some of that stuff works really effectively when you are in a room and you can get the emotions going and you got the percussion and everything else. But then when
Yeah.
you're doing it on screen, ironically, it holds up less well than like a mass, which is strange because the mass is explicitly incarnational, so you can't receive communion over the internet. But nevertheless, the general feel of the worship can be such where it draws people in. So we're seeing some of that, but I wouldn't be surprised if a generation from now we see a pendulum in the opposite direction where people who grow up like in TLM communities often feel like it's too stifling, too rigid, and so then they go the opposite direction. So you do have that kind of push and pull where people want to feel free to worship God, but they also want to know they're worshiping God as he wants to be worshiped. And so balancing those two things or achieving those two things. So yeah, the non-denomination people will still be here. And a lot of Southern Baptists are becoming non-denominational because why be part of anything bigger than your local denomination is, I think, the sort of impetus. So in the numbers, a lot of Baptists become non-denominational and very little else changes because they're basically Baptists without authority or with even less of an authority structure.
I mean by conditional election that people are predestined to heaven by prevenient grace. So if they do well heaven, they will go to heaven. I mean, being predestined to heaven by prevenient grace, everybody is predestined to heaven by prevenient grace. If you mean like everybody is given sufficient grace to order them to, a supernatural end. So like the question kind of doesn't even in that way make sense. If you mean like the sort of idea that God, before the consideration of merits, predestines everyone to grace, which is exactly actually how the Molinists speak, along with the Thomists, Suarezians, and others. Like in sort of that sense, like everybody agrees. Like the big question has to do with predestination to glory, and how that relates to like the actual use of sufficient grace already given. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, sure. There's multiplicity of beliefs that's allowed on that position, but honestly, you shouldn't determine your adherence to a position by the laxest possible position that's allowed by the church or like the most attractive position that's allowed by the church, but wherever the truth of divine revelation compels you, which is obviously St. Thomas's positions.
I was waiting for that part. Have you read Father William Most?
Yes, I think that William Most, what's interesting about him is he goes in a lot of directions that are actually good intuitions, but unfortunately he does not draw these out to Father Francisco Marin Sola's conclusions. So in that way, he actually talks about Sola and critiques Sola. But I think a lot of his concerns end up being answered by Sola before the fact. But I think he's very, very much a genuine appeal, a genuine explanation of the matter that I find to be very interesting, but ultimately unconvincing.
Fair enough. I like his work. I think I don't want to speak for him for sure, but I think Carlo Broussard shares some of the exact same critiques he just expressed. But he might be an interesting person to dialogue with about that. Although,
Yeah, I think Broussard's like a hardcore Bonyesian, isn't he?
Yeah,
because I'm not a Bonyesian.
But
so
yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, just throwing that out there.
True. Catholic answers Thomism must happen. What would you be if you were a punctuation mark?
It's fun to say something like an interrobang, but honestly, an M dash.
I'd be a comma. I like commas. Pretty cool.
I'm emphatic and I point beyond myself. So
true. Do Eastern Orthodox bishops have ordinary jurisdiction? No. If not, how would their confessions and marriages be recognized by the Catholic Church as valid? Because they're extraordinary jurisdiction, like supplied jurisdiction. This is how also the confirmations of Eastern Orthodox priests are valid, because they're not like deputed by their own bishops. They're deputed by the Holy See. I actually had a huge struggle with this when I was looking through Catholicism. Like that was my like Spurg moment where I was thinking about like, oh no, if the ordinary minister, the sacrament of confirmations, the bishop, how are all of these Eastern Catholic, like how are all these Eastern Catholic confirmations valid? And that was like a huge thing for me. Kind of
Um,
weird thing to get stuck up on, but I
I
was.
mean, I wouldn't have expected you to get stuck up on a normal thing. Uh,
True.
JD Flynn at the Pillar made a similar argument that the Pope could just withdraw this for the SSPX to make the ordinations not valid. And unlike with the Orthodox case, the society would, I think, presumably recognize that the Pope has the authority to do this. And so it could actually stop this, but the tremendous damage it would do to something like Catholic Orthodox ecumenism would be vast.
True. Yeah. The Pope could just say like we're not going to allow any valid marriages or confessions or confirm. I think no, I think they have Episcopal confirmations now that I think about it. But I mean they could actually I don't know, dude. Does the SSPX
I
practice
know they
only
did not have
confirmations?
jurisdiction for marriages or for confessions. And so this was the really crazy thing. Like Pope Francis actually relaxed a lot of this.
Yeah,
And so,
true. Trad.
Archdiocese of Kansas City, Kansas handles the marriage stuff that happens with the society. But otherwise, you have a lot of dubious marriages, unfortunately.
Oy vey. How much time do I spend? You just read a lot.
Watch
Just
a couple
read.
TikTok videos. Good.
True. Joe watches
I'm
TikTok
just kidding.
videos.
Don't
I have impressive books behind me, so I read.
I
But
don't.
I mean, like, yeah, but when I was, in high school, I kind of just grabbed everything I could and just read and read a lot, read universally and systematically. I didn't. The biggest thing, I guess, is not to like spurg out about individual topics. Like, don't become attached to like studying a little itty bitty point of theology because everybody around you finds that discussion interesting. You need to have a systematic understanding of things that'll help explain things a lot better, and it'll keep you very lucid in how you understand things. I've found that a lot of people they'll just like get really really into like the nitty gritty of one like thesis of theology, and they'll waste so much time, and they also won't even understand that thesis of theology because they don't understand it in its unity with the rest of theology. So it's a very sad thing, but it's a very important thing that you don't get stuck up on.
Yeah, getting formed in the basic kind of systematic treatment, having fundamental theology, something as just a foundation to build on is very helpful. When I started in apologetics, I was 24. I was a second year law student and was just going deep. And I wasn't trying to be any kind of theologian. It was mostly just discovering stuff in the fathers and being like, look at this. This is really cool. And then doing some biblical exegesis sort of stuff. But I made a lot of mistakes along the way. And going to seminary was very helpful in getting that more systematic formation. I mean, I was doing a lot of reading as well. I don't know how many hours. But I think if you aren't going to go to seminary, if you're not going to do any kind of theology program in a systematic way, that it's all the more incumbent to try to fill those gaps, not piecemeal, but in a way that is more of a whole. And then the other thing I'd just say, this probably means getting offline for a lot of people, because I was blessed in that when I was doing this, the internet was way less interesting than it is now. And I think, when did iPhone 1 come out? Like 2008, something like that. I think I might have had an iPhone 1, which is insane.
You had an iPhone 1 while I was in first grade when
Shut
that
up.
came
I don't
out.
wanna. Yeah, it came out 2007. I might have had an iPhone 2,
Oh, okay. I
whatever
was
it
in
was, or iPhone
pre-K.
3,
Okay.
whatever it was. But it was like, not the most entertaining, distracting thing. But now it's much harder to get reading done because there's videos and there's
Yeah.
a million distractions at your fingertips. And so you just have to put it all away and try to get reading done as you can. And it's harder than it was before.
Okay. The sex after vasectomy thing.
No, it's not sinful for this reason. You are not willing the contraceptive dimension. That there's the past action of the vasectomy was sinful, but once you've repented of it, it's good to have the vasectomy reversed. It's not always successful, and it's painful and difficult, and it's not required of the church that you have a reversal. So this is one of those situations where a person who's had a vasectomy and hasn't had it reversed, if their reasons for not having it reversed are non-contraceptive, the fear of pain, the cost, the medical conditions that can arise from that, etc., then in that case, they're not intentionally thwarting the sexual act. Their past action has led to the effect that the sexual act is thwarted in some sense. So again, it's good if they got a reversal, but they're not engaged in a new sin every time or anything like that.
Yeah, I had kind of funny. I thought about this like 6 to 8 months ago, I want to say, about the reversal of the vasectomy, whether it's morally necessary or not. And I looked literally everywhere, like top to bottom, like everything I could try to find. I could not find like a decision from the church or like a traditional moralist. It was kind of just like recent people kind of reasoning from moral principles. That's all I could find. Very interesting.
Yeah, I don't know
Like
if a
that should be a
church.
pretty important question to ask.
Right. I don't know of a church document dealing with this, but that's the answer I've gotten repeatedly, and was taught
That's
as
one I've
well.
heard as well. Could I receive communion if I really doubt my baptism in Protestantism? It was done in the future tense. No, because you can't use probabilism. Well, one, you doubt. So like it's not even a question of probabilities. It's a question of like an actual doubt. If you have like legitimate grounds for doubting the validity of your baptism, and this hasn't been resolved by ecclesiastical authorities, then you can in good conscience receive the Eucharist, because that would be putting yourself in danger of sacrilege. And when it comes to the sacraments, since they're divine things, you can't use probabilism to determine the question.
It was done in future tense.
That's really strange.
You will be baptized in the name of the Father and Son.
It's almost certainly.
Given that this is a case where at the very least you can get a conditional baptism. If there is a legitimate doubt about the validity, if this is something where the church hasn't given a clear answer either way, you can respect the oneness of, because the two sides are, you don't want to continue to do those things open only to the baptized, like receiving communion, if you're not baptized. On the other hand, if you are baptized, you don't want to get a second invalid baptism.
Yeah.
So if you find yourself in such a situation, asking for, as soon as possible, a conditional baptism is the way to do it.
Yeah, I had an annoying situation where somebody like I talked to somebody and they like had a case where like a sacrament was 100% like invalidly performed. Like the form was completely defective. And there were a document from the church on this. And there were I talked to multiple different canonists to get them to like sign off on this. And the priest was just like incorrigible about it and refused to give a conditional sacrament to this individual. And that you run into that, unfortunately, a lot. It's very sad.
That is terrible. I mean, hopefully someone else would do it.
I actually don't know what ended up happening in that case, now that I think about it. Joe, would you beat Wagner in rock, paper, scissors? No, he wouldn't.
I mean, there's a way we could test this.
Okay. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot.
Looks like I just did. All right. Well, that's settled that.
Is Thomism necessary for salvation?
Depends. Necessary is used in two senses. The way it is necessary for a man to use a horse and travel in a long distance, or the way something is strictly necessary.
True. I distinguish. What is the most commonly held to accident heresy? I would say the idea that the accidents in the Eucharist in here with a subject rather than without a subject. That is the most commonly held accident heresy.
You're taking that very literally. Is that what is meant, or does he mean the most commonly held unintentional
I
heresy?
don't know. It seems like he had an accident in how he was spelling these words.
I think there's a lot of Pelagians where there's the
Yeah.
idea of having to earn God's love, having to earn forgiveness. And I think that's a very common error that we fall into as Americans.
True. Well, you don't need to reconcile it. So I hope that helps your question. I don't know what this is supposed to mean. I would suggest that if you have questions about this, you would just like kind of read a book about the topic. Like that's very helpful because it's often hard to understand which questions to ask and how to ask them if you don't already know a little bit about the topic.
Can I sketch out a very broad thing that I think should be hopefully encouraging? Because I know this is an area where people can really struggle. On the one hand, God desires all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. And he does give the graces necessary for salvation to everyone. All the schools agree on this.
True.
And God gives different graces to different people and different amounts of grace to different people. Mary is by prevenient grace preserved from original and actual sin, and I was not. And so the idea that some people get more graces than others is just a fact that we all have to agree on and recognize. And so then the question becomes, well, how do we harmonize those two things, particularly if not everyone is saved? I would just point to the parable of the talents. God gives 5 and 2 and 1 talent. He does give different amounts of grace. He does give different amounts of natural talents, etc. And then he judges us according to how we use the graces that were given to us. So no one can stand before God on the last day and accuse God of injustice because their neighbor got 5 talents and they only got 2, because they were only expected to double 2 rather than doubling 5. So don't feel like this is in any way inconsistent with the love of God. There is a more mysterious mechanism when we get really into the weeds about why did this person say yes to grace and this person didn't. But some of that I think is fine to entrust to the mercy of God.
True. Very true. Thank you for the sticker thingy.
That was Thomas. I think he was coming to defend himself after.
Oh, true. Bro, how are they still going? Because we had to answer all the questions. Wait, so can we commune at a Sede parish if permitted by them, or SSPX parish post excommunication on July 1st, assuming no scandal to others? Well, the SSPX question is easy because I can't remember which dicastery it is. There is a Vatican dicastery trust, I didn't make this up, that talks about what formal adherence to the schism actually is. Because the same rules would have applied before and after the lifting of the excommunications, because those don't apply to like laymen randomly going to a mass. It applies to the individuals named. So like you going to an SSPX mass in a non-exclusive manner does not necessarily imply formal adherence to the schism. Like this is just what the document says.
I think you're talking about the Pontifical Council for the Interpretation of Legislative Texts.
True.
From 1996.
True. This is exactly what I was talking about, which, by the way, 1996 was before the excommunications were lifted. So again, it doesn't really matter. Like a lot of people point to the July 1st date as like, oh, this is going to change my relationship with the SSPX. It doesn't. Like it doesn't apply to the layman going to an SSPX chapel. This applies to the bishops who will ordain and be ordained.
Yes. And I think it's worth reading paragraphs 5 and 6 and then 7. They explain that Lefebvrean deacons and priests, they're using the way we normally, like Lutheran or something like this, where they're treating it as a heresy or as a schism. But then, and they say that it's clear that the deacons and priests are in ministerial roles of the schismatic movement, and this is evidence of a formal adherence. On the other hand, they say, in the case of the rest of the faithful, it is obvious that an occasional participation in liturgical acts or the activity of the Lefebvrean movement, done without making one's own attitude of doctrinal and disciplinary disunion of such a movement, without making one's own. the attitude of doctrinal and disciplinary disunion of such movement does not suffice for one to be able to speak of formal adherence to the movement. In pastoral practice, the result can be that it is more difficult to judge their situation. One must take account above all of the person's intentions and the putting into practice of this internal disposition. For this reason, the various situations are going to be judged case by case, and the competent forms both internal and external.
True. Very true.
But they then go on to distinguish between the moral question on the existence or not of schism and the juridical and penal question on the existence of the delict of schism, like whether there's canonical schism and whether there's moral schism.
This is very true. Love to hear it. Yeah, the sede parish, I think that would be an obvious no. Outside of cases of like moral necessity.
Which, by the way, moral necessity is not just that you prefer the preaching.
True. Clarity, yes. It's like you're in Siberia and the only parish near you is a sedevacantist parish. And, obviously you could technically like fly to, I don't know, Rome to go have mass with the Pope, but you're kind of separated out there. And if you require the sacraments, you require the sacraments.
I mean, even a more kind of concrete case would be in Germany. I know of Americans who've gone to SSPX parishes because they knew that there would be a valid mass, and because they don't speak German, they were not able to adjudicate whether there were valid consecrations even, and there were enough liturgical abuses that this felt like a grounded fear, where it wasn't just, oh, they're liberal or they're even heretical. It was, they seem to be doing something weird liturgically, and I can't tell if this is even a valid mass. And without having that competency, they knew that the SSPX mass would be valid, which is, a huge embarrassment for those dioceses. But
okay, last question. Does Eastern Orthodox chrismation by a priest require a faculty from the Pope for validity, not an additional faculty? I guess that's...
is this a canonical
not
thing?
like an additional faculty because it's already presumed.
Yeah, I see what
jurisdiction's already presumed for them. Like the Pope doesn't need to do this. He just does it because he's nice. Basically, because he does. That's like the Protestant question of like, oh, why doesn't the Pope just, open up the gates of purgatory and get all the souls out? Well, he gives faculties to a lot of these schismatics. Seems pretty nice of him. Like, boy, what else do you want to ask him to do? He's doing everything he can. He's just lay off of him for a second. Okay, well, this almost 3.5 hour stream, one of the longest ever on my channel.
This was a pleasure. I really enjoyed this.
Oh, this was really fun. Thank you, Joe, for coming on here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you as a subsidiary of Catholic Inc. and all that. So
true. This is how they control us. By the way,
are you going to tell people I talked to you before you became Catholic?
Oh yeah. So Joe and I, before I became Catholic, through Father Gregory Pine, which I'm actually gonna probably in the next month or so, I'm gonna have him on for an interview. Father Gregory Pine, for some reason we reached out to him. We asked him some questions about Catholicism. He's like, "Oh, I know this guy you should talk to," and he connected me with Joe. And I didn't like connect the dots in my head until years later that like, oh, that was Joe Heschmeyer that I talked to.
Yeah, I had the same thing of not knowing, because it was originally two brothers who you were friends with, and they're like, can our friends come along with you and another guy? I don't know if that fourth guy ever became Catholic or not. But
yeah, he did.
That's awesome.
Yep, all of us. What was the last straw for you leaving Anglicanism theologically? The conversation with Joe. Last straw.
Smooth as butter.
True. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Remember, like, subscribe, share it, everything like that. Thank you, Joe. And as always, God bless.